Catherine most of all liked to work in the country, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the fresh air. She ran her own company. Sometimes she just needed to get away from her daily worries, to be alone with herself, and gardening helped her with that. Her husband Stephen was not very fond of working in the soil, but he understood her desire to be in nature. Everything he was entrusted to do in the house required the application of brute male strength: digging the garden, fixing something, chopping and fetching firewood. He accepted these weekly tasks and pretended to enjoy them too. "Look at the roses," Catherine said, and held a flower right up to his nose. "This year the roses have bloomed especially lushly." "I see. Don't you like it?" "I don't know. I think the flowers would have grown without us. Nature is very clever, smarter than man." "Yeah, sure. Do you know how much effort it takes to grow a rose like this? I tended it every week." "You just like tending to them, don't you?" "Oh wow, are you saying that my labor in the garden has no effect at all?" Catherine straightened up and put her arms at her sides. "You see how hard I work." "You are good," praised Catherine's husband. Satisfied hummed. She bent down again and began to walk around the bushes. Stephen looked at her thoughtfully through the coconut grasses. In their family, it was Catherine who made all the money. He worked his heart's calling as a foreman in a factory. His wife was always nagging him about it and offering to take part in their joint family business. Stephen every time said that it was not his, that he was not interested in communicating with suppliers, building relationships with customers, and most of all, he did not like to do the accounting. Catherine every time began to argue with him and talk about the advantages, proving that their own business, it is very profitable. Then Stephen would usually retire to another room. He didn't even want to be part of the conversation. "It's getting colder," Catherine said. "They promised a thunderstorm tonight. Did you chop wood?" "Well, there they are." "Why are they here? They should be in the house," said Catherine. "While I'm finishing up here, go and make the fire." "What do you say?" Stephen took a pile of firewood and tried to get up, but immediately bent from the intense pain. He was familiar with the sensation because of his past kidney problems. "What's the matter with you?" his wife asked unhappily. "It'll go away." "Don't tell me it's starting again." "No, it'll be fine. You remember what the doctor said. They did everything they could. If you have a seizure, no one's going to save you." "It's gone now," Stephen said. He tried to carry the firewood again, but he only had the strength to walk into the hallway and drop it on the floor. The man immediately fell down beside them. "What have you got there?" Catherine shouted from the vegetable garden when she heard the rumble. There was no answer. Then the woman carefully straightened her back and, holding one hand on her lower back, slowly walked toward the house. In the hallway, she immediately saw her husband lying there. "What's the matter with you?" "Kidney seizure again," he nodded, unable to utter a word from the pain. "You always give me trouble. I guess you've been drinking beer again. You're suffering now." "An ambulance," Stephen wheezed. "I'll call one. I'm not going to drag you home myself." Catherine picked up her cell phone and called an ambulance. When she finished talking and returned to the hallway, her husband was already unconscious from severe pain. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked at him unhappily. "When will this all be over?" she asked unbeknownst to her. Stephen's health problems had long been a headache for her. He could go to the hospital for a month, and she had to work alone, and she had to take care of the household. Naturally, when he was discharged, he couldn't help her. But he needed care, and there were additional expenses for medicines and procedures. Doctors warned that they could only ease the pain of the seizures, but there was no way to cure his disease. The seizures could worsen and occur more frequently. Then Stephen will have to live almost all the time in the hospital under the supervision of doctors. This arrangement his wife Catherine categorically did not suit. She did not want to spend the rest of her youth to deal with a sick man. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. Stephen was loaded onto a stretcher and taken to the nearest hospital. The man opened his eyes and, to his surprise, found that he was lying at home in his bed. "Ecthrin," called Catherine, said grudgingly. "What was wrong with me?" Stephen asked. "The usual, a seizure. Why did they bring me home and not to the hospital?" "Would you have slept longer?" "You were in the hospital for 2 days. The doctor said you were stable and let you go home. Now I'm gonna have to take care of you." "Thank you." Stephen leaned back on the pillows, closed his eyes from weakness. "I'm hungry." "The nurse is coming. She'll cook for you." What about you?" "I've got work, business meetings. I can't chill here with you." The woman was putting on makeup in front of the mirror. "Don't leave me. You'll have a nurse with you. She's experienced, Catherine. Please stay with me. If you only knew how fed up I am with hospitals and medication, and how fed up I am with them, you have no idea," Catherine exclaimed unhappily. "Well, if you need to go on business, then I will not detain you." "What did the doctor say?" "They said it's gotten worse. They gave you a bunch of tests to take. There's a list on the table, and there's a list of recommendations and prescriptions." "Can I see it?" "You can't get up and get it yourself." "I guess I can." Stephen pulled back the edges of the blanket and put his feet on the floor. His eyes immediately went dark. "You're not capable of doing anything on your own." The woman handed him a sheet of paper from the table. "It says terminal." The doctor explained what that meant. Stephen got worried when he read the doctor's report. "It means they won't treat me." "What do you mean they won't treat you? They're just making me suffer in pain and die. There are painkillers on the table." "Isn't there a chance?" Stephen asked anxiously. "Can you see for yourself?" The doorbell rang. Catherine ran to open the door. On the threshold stood a young girl with a white suitcase. "Good afternoon. I'm the nurse. My name is Olivia," she introduced herself. "You're just in time. I'm Catherine. Your ward, Stephen, is on the bed. Nice to meet you." The girl undressed, washed her hands in the bathroom, and went into the bedroom. She took a tonometer out of her suitcase and sat down on the edge of the bed to take Stephen's blood pressure. "I can see you'll be fine without me," Catherine said. "Don't worry," Olivia assured her, and then turned to the man. "Your blood pressure is very low. How are you feeling?" "I feel very weak," Stephen complained. "I'll make you some lunch, and you'll feel better." Olivia put the tonometer away. "I'm off. I'll be back late tonight," Catherine said. "Olivia, here's some of the money, and you'll get the rest when you turn in your shift. It's more than we agreed on. Think of it as a bonus." Catherine threw on a light jacket, took a bright orange bag, and shoes to match. If Stephen had been able to draw any conclusions, he would have realized that his wife was not going to work like that. But now he lay with his eyes closed and tried not to faint. Catherine bought 2 takeaway coffees at the cafe. On the street, she gave one of the glasses to a tall man in his 30s. "Thank you, dear. I've been dreaming about it all day," said the man, opened the lid and gently blew on the hot drink. "You're welcome. Want to go for a walk? Or do you have to go home already?" "No, I don't. Let's go for a walk in the park." The man's name was Roger. He gallantly offered Catherine his arm, and the couple walked along the path, along which stretched neatly trimmed bushes. "You're not like that today," Roger noticed. "Oh, it's nothing. Something's happened, and you don't want to tell me." "I'm fine. But my husband is." "What's wrong with him? Has he taken to drinking after all?" Roger asked with a scornful grin. "No, he's not in good health. It got worse at the hospital again," Catherine said sadly. "The hospital refused to treat and nurse him. I have to do it outside the house." "Yes," Roger took out a cigarette and smoked. "All of them. With who?" "I hired a nurse. You shouldn't waste your time with him. I don't even know why you're bothering with him." "Oh, Roger," Catherine sank down on the bench under the big lilac bush. "I think about it all the time, too. You can't divorce him. He won't agree." "What a man." "That's a real man," Roger said ironically. "He's already got 1 foot in the grave. Doesn't he realize that you're still a young woman? And now he's a burden." "I don't think he thinks about it," Catherine sighed. "Does he know about me?" Roger asked curiously. "You're always going out of the house without explanation." "He thinks I go to work." "Roger, doesn't he appreciate you at all? You can't you see that? Let's get married and live as a normal family." Roger took his beloved's hand and pressed it against his chest. "You think I don't want that? This is the right moment." "No," He won't give me a divorce voluntarily. We'll have to drag it through the court, and there he will cling. I've got half of the joint assets, which is my business, my house. You started the business on your own, but you were already married at the time. So divorce is not the answer. How many years are we going to keep our relationship a secret? I want us to live together, said Catherine sadly. I understand, Roger nodded. You yourself would be happy to take him anywhere, only to never see him again. But how to do it and where to take him? That's a great idea, Catherine exclaimed. I remember how you said that your grandmother from the village and left you a house there. That's right. I forgot about this house. In Roger's eyes suddenly sparkled light. Then things are going to work out very well. If anyone has any questions, you can always say that your husband Howard decided to go to his hometown to die, and it wasn't our fault, Roger suggested. Do you think the neighbors will believe I'm taking him to that house? And tell all the neighbors and acquaintances that he himself expressed a desire to live in the village for a while. You know, there are some people who think that fresh air and natural products can cure anything. My husband is certainly not like that, Catherine objected. No one would believe that. How would they know? You have no idea how people change when death approaches. My grandfather was always a rude, angry man. He didn't even have any friends because he was unbearable to talk to. And what do you think? As soon as he was diagnosed with a severe illness at 72, it was like he was replaced. He became sociable, went to church for the first time in his life, did charity work. You're right, Catherine nodded. My husband also changed during his illness, but not for the better. He was a wreck before, and now he moans from every ailment, she recalled with indignation. He's made life unbearable. So now we have a plan, Roger said firmly. I guess so. Catherine looked into his eyes and saw such determination and love that all her doubts instantly dissipated. A short time later, Catherine was driving the car down a country road. Where are we going for the third time in their short trip? Howard asked. To get some fresh air, Catherine answered, keeping her eyes on the road. Will you like it? Can you at least tell me where it is? It's in the country. That's news to me. I can't go to the village now, Howard said worriedly. Why not? Didn't you hear what the doctor said? I'm too weak. He'll probably make me work there. Don't be silly. We're just going there to get some fresh air and walk in the woods. You'll feel better. I'll feel better if we get home and I take my medicine on time, Howard said, rubbing his back with his hand over his kidney area. I can already feel it starting to hurt, Howard complained. I brought my medication with me. Let's stop and I'll drink them. And how much farther are we going to go? Be patient for a while, Catherine replied. They drove in silence. Howard was beginning to realize what was going on. His wife avoided making eye contact with him, and it was not her style to surprise him with tourist trips, but he was afraid to ask her directly. He already realized what a burden he was to her. Despite the growing pain, he didn't mention the pills again and decided to take it as it came. The car stopped outside a ramshackle wooden house with boarded-up windows. Doesn't anyone live here? Howard asked. My grandmother used to live here, but she died a long time ago. This house stands empty. I thought it might be a good place to live, answered Catherine. It looks very old. That's just from the outside. They unloaded some bags from the trunk. Catherine's husband followed her into the house doomedly. Of course, inside it was as dilapidated as it looked from the outside. The wooden floors survived and creaked nastily. The once white stove was covered with soot and dust, and cobwebs hung in the corners. It's a nice place to live, Catherine said, looking around, only if you clean it well and do a complete overhaul. Howard sat down on the sofa with difficulty, and a spring jumped out of it and dug painfully into his leg. Do whatever you need to do. You're leaving me here alone. I have to go to work, Catherine replied. So that's what I thought, Howard summarized. About what? I thought you wanted to get rid of me. Don't make it up. You'll be very well here. Catherine laid out her husband's things beside him on the sofa. Here are some warm clothes, and here's your medicine and some money. Catherine, aren't you ashamed? Why should I be ashamed? I'm doing what's best for you. You know I'm gonna die here. How do you get from here to the nearest hospital without a car? There's a perfectly good ambulance here, Catherine said flatly. We drove about 50 minutes from the city, Stephen said, his head downcast. If I get sick, they won't be able to save me in time. But I understand. No one wants to take care of a sick man when there is an opportunity to find a new, healthy husband, answered Catherine. I'm not going to look for anyone. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I saw a man walking you home yesterday. He was a coworker of mine, and he kissed you just as a friend, Catherine justified. Are you following me? Well, that's your business. Stephen waved his hand and began to sort out his things. I realized that I'm no longer alive. Everything will be fine, Catherine patted him on the shoulder, and without looking him in the eyes, left the house. She got into the car and for a while watched through the window as her husband sat staring at the floor. Catherine was a tough woman, not prone to sentimentality, but now even she had something akin to pity in her soul. In order not to give in to her feelings, she started the engine and drove as fast as she could onto the road, leaving the village far behind. Stephen didn't know how many days he had lain on the bed, moving only to drink the medicine. Strangely enough, he felt no hunger. The man was barely conscious and in severe pain. He thought he was hallucinating because he heard the door to the house open and someone stepped inside. Footsteps sounded from the front door through the hayloft and stopped in the room. From the sound of it, someone had collapsed on the couch and was crying. Stephen couldn't tell if he was dreaming or if this was really happening. Was it really his wife coming back to take him home? He tried to get up, but immediately felt a sharp pain and collapsed back onto the pillows. All he could do was mumble helplessly. Who's there? A frightened voice came from the room. Not again, the man said. Stay back. I have a gas canister with me, a young female voice warned him. It's all right. It was me who went slowly behind the stove, answered the young village girl. Who are you, and how did you get here? Water, asked the man. All right, I'll get you some. But just try to trick me if you come at me from behind. I'm not responsible for myself. The girl, keeping her eyes on Stephen, went out into the hay, went to the well to fetch water. She scooped a mug from the bucket and returned to the house. The girl gingerly approached Stephen and held out the water to him. Here, drink. Help me, she said. What can I do? Stephen answered. She did not know how best to approach him, awkwardly lifted him by the shoulders and brought the mug directly to his lips. Come on, drink. It's hard for me to hold you back. Thank you, Stephen said after a sip. Where did you come from? Who are you? My name is Patricia, the girl introduced herself. Are you homeless? How did you end up in this house? Do you know it has a landlady and she can come here? I know, Stephen answered, panting with difficulty. Hand me those pills in the yellow jar. Why do you have so much medicine here? Are you sick a lot? Patricia handed him a pack of pills. Do you have any painkillers? Maybe I have some at home, but we're all healthy, so we don't keep much medicine. Where's the nearest pharmacy? About 60 kilometers, but it's hard to get there after the rain, she said. Are you in pain? She sat trustingly on the edge of his bed. Shall I send for a doctor? You don't look well. I can manage on my own, Stephen said. Where are you from? I live at the other end of the village. I got kicked out of my house. It happens a lot. I'm an orphan, and I fight with my stepmother over every little thing. She can even hit me. I have nowhere else to go. So I come to this house to cry alone. You're probably not interested in any of this. Poor thing, Stephen sympathized with the girl. But then he grimaced and clutched his back. What's your pain? Are you a doctor? Patricia asked. I may be uneducated, but I know a thing or two about medicine. Let me take a look at you. Patricia lifted his shirt and put her hand on the sore spot. Stephen almost howled in pain, but held back. She scrutinized his face, touched his temperature with her hand, and looked into his eyes. It's the kidneys, Patricia said in a matter-of-fact manner. I already know that, Stephen replied. Let me see. She took his hand and felt for a pulse. Then she looked at his veins. "You're in a bad way. You must be saved. Don't forget about me." "I already know I'm going to die," Stephen said. "Do you know that it's a sin to try to pass away voluntarily?" Patricia asked. "Look at you. You're probably 50 years old and you've got a lot to live for. Are you already calling for death? Or look, she'll hear you and come for me." Even the doctors at the hospital refused. "I won't refuse." Patricia stood up confidently and looked around. "You don't even have a kettle here. And I'll get you one. You'll need plates and utensils. I'll be right back." "You don't need anything." Stephen held her hand. "Stay out of it. You're a young girl. You should be thinking about your life, not about how to save a hopelessly sick old man." "I've nursed more than that," said Patricia. "My grandfather was about to die, too, always complaining that he was in pain, clutching at his heart. But now nothing. He even found a new love." "You cured him." Stephen was surprised. "Of course I can do it. We had a teacher at the orphanage. She taught me everything. I've been living without medicine since I was a child. If something happens, I just go out into the field and pick medicinal herbs." "What are you talking about?" Stephen objected. "Look at all the medicines I have, and they don't always help me." "What are we going to throw those medicines away?" Patricia asked. "Don't you dare," Stephen exclaimed. "I'll be in pain here in no time at all. Maybe they're what you're suffering from?" "I'll be right back," said Patricia. The girl threw a handkerchief over her head and went out of the house. Stephen saw her go down the road to the other end of the village. And then suddenly she broke off and ran at full speed. Roger, Catherine's young lover, was enjoying his new residence. As soon as the woman had sent her husband to the village, he had immediately moved in with her. He liked that now there was no need to hide, and in addition, it was possible to successfully combine family relations with financial well-being. Catherine did not really want to immediately start living with a new man, but Roger promised that he would manage the household, and besides, she liked him very much. At first, she was unaccustomed to the fact that a man was courting her. Her ex-husband couldn't stand housework, so every time he cooked something, he thought he had done a great job and demanded extra attention for it. Roger, on the other hand, realized that he would never earn as much as his beloved, therefore calmly stepped aside and considered it his duty to simply help Catherine in everything that he can. "Wow, how clean we have," said Catherine, changing into house slippers. "I know how to mop floors," Roger joked. "I ordered food for dinner tonight." Catherine dropped her bag in the hallway, and Roger immediately picked it up and hung it neatly on the coat rack. "You're in a bad mood today. Did you have a bad day?" he asked. "I'm going to lie down for a while, if you don't mind," Catherine said dryly. Of course, Roger nodded. He covered his beloved with a blanket and kissed her cheek. "If something happened and you want to talk about it, you don't have to keep it to yourself. I'll listen to you." "I don't know if I want to talk about it," Roger. Catherine sighed. "I will. It will make you feel better," Catherine said. "I don't have good news." "Do you have something wrong with your health?" Roger looked questioningly at the woman. "Can we handle it together?" "No. There's nothing wrong with my health. The only thing is that these worries are making my heart ache." Roger took a glass of water, poured in some Corvallo. "Drink it, and you'll feel better," he said. Catherine drank the whole glass in one gulp. "Thank you. We'll probably have to move from here to a smaller apartment." "Why?" Roger wondered. "You see, I've had a little trouble with my business. The suppliers brought us the wrong product. The customers brought it back. We can't contractually return it to the suppliers. As luck would have it, we made a big bet on this deal, and now we've lost both money and the trust of a very important customer. I don't understand." "Are you saying that your business is gone?" Roger frowned, trying to understand the situation. But he didn't understand business. "There is still hope that things will recover. But this case has set us back about 10 years. Our revenues will be much lower now. That's why I'm saying I can't pay for such a big place anymore." "But the business still exists." Roger didn't understand. "How can I explain it to you? We had a big international company, and now, because of this incident, we can only operate in America, which greatly reduces our revenue. I still don't understand it. Where are we going to move to? Someplace away from downtown? Yes, away from downtown. And we'll have to sell the car. So we'll be living far away and taking public transportation. I'm not happy about that either, Catherine sighed. Roger pretended to make tea for his beloved, but he himself tensely tried to understand what he should do next. Catherine loved going to spas. In her current situation, she didn't have the money for it, but she decided to pamper herself anyway and went to a bathhouse. Of course, an ordinary steam room was not comparable to the elite spa procedures to which Catherine was accustomed, massages with hot stones, honey wraps, and swimming in a huge pool. But she felt a little better. When Catherine returned home, all her thoughts were on how to rebuild the business. Suddenly, she noticed 2 large bags standing in the living room. "Roger, are you home?" she called out, getting no response. Catherine walked through the rooms and found her lover smoking nervously on the balcony. "Ah, there you are. You're back already," Roger exclaimed. "Today I literally for half an hour looked at the bath. I have to give up my old habits. But that's all right. The important thing is that we have each other," said Catherine. "In about 5 years, I'll have the business back up and running. That's a long time. I'll already be 40, Roger said sadly and puffed on his cigarette. "So what? I'm already 42. "Exactly. But you've had a good life, and I haven't yet." "What do you mean you've lived? You think I'm going to die because of a bad day at work?" "I mean, you've had a lot of things in your life. You've lived in a fancy house, spent months in Hawaii. You have a beautiful car and very expensive clothes." "I do not understand where you are going," Catherine frowned, hugging her lover from behind. "I want to get all this too. Don't you understand why you need youth if you can't have everything you want, and you'll have it all too? But when you can start your own business too, I don't understand why you're still working where you don't get paid enough." "Business is not my thing," Roger replied, throwing the cigarette butt out the window and breathing in the fresh air. "Then what do you want?" "I want someone I can rely on. Do you understand?" "Frankly, I don't understand," Catherine frowned. "So you only wanted money and good living conditions from me?" "You don't say that. I liked you as a woman." "These are the details that come out," said Catherine. "I wonder why there are these bags in the room." "My things are in them." "I can't go on like this," Roger replied. "Understand me? How exactly can't I do it anymore? Before you told me you were having business problems, you were happy and swore you were in love. So what's changed in the last 2 days?" "Everything has changed. I can't lie to you anymore." Roger turned to Catherine and took her by the shoulders. "I have someone else." "What do you mean?" Catherine was confused. "I fell in love, and I can't do anything about it. Not for a long time. I've only known her for a couple of weeks, and I've already decided to leave you for her." "You do realize that for your sake I sent my husband to die in the village?" Catherine shrieked. "I didn't ask for that," she shouted and threw his hands away. "And who was it who persuaded me that he was a burden to me? That he'd be better off outdoors? And that he'd be better off dying there? That's what you said. So now it's all my fault." "Let's part amicably," Roger suggested, trying to hug Catherine, but she pushed him away rather hard. "This is interesting. So when I'm a millionaire, you're handsome, car, you agree even to commit a crime with me. But as soon as I'm a simple woman who loves you, I don't need you." "It's not about money," Roger objected. "What are you saying?" Catherine opened the closet and dumped her lover's things into the bags. "Go to your new fling. She must be rich. And I don't want to see you anymore. She has a beautiful house. Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see you as a pimp. Because I'm not. I used to have real feelings for you. It's just that things are different now," Roger protested. "So come live with me. I've already rented a studio apartment. It's very nice, but it's in a residential neighborhood," said Catherine. "Such a life is not for me," Roger replied, neatly putting his things into bags. Catherine looked at Roger, and tears ran down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she felt so vulnerable, just now when she needed the support of a loving man the most. I won't keep you any longer, Roger said, zipping up his bags. I'll go out into the hallway. You'll be fine. Please don't leave me alone, Catherine exclaimed, upset. The disheveled hair and crying face gave the woman a pathetic look. It's just the way it is. I'll make money again. Just don't walk away from me. I'm 42 now. Nobody wants me anymore. Roger, you have to understand me. It's the first time I've ever really fallen in love with a man, she begged. I loved you too. Come live with me at least until I get used to my new apartment, Roger asked. I'm sorry, but I can't and don't want to spend my life on charity, he replied. So life with me is just charity to you now? Well, get the hell out of here, Catherine angrily blurted out. Don't cry. It makes you old, Roger threw, closing the door behind him. Catherine was left all alone. She looked in the mirror and noticed how bad she looked. The woman hadn't gotten much sleep the last few weeks and was constantly worrying about the deal. She had to work nights. It was exhausting her, and she didn't have the energy or time to look after herself at all. Looking at her reflection, she thought that her personal life would never get better. Her last romance had ended, and in such a ridiculous way. She poured herself some valerian, took a cigarette and went out to smoke on the balcony. Stephen opened his eyes and suddenly felt awake. During the months of his illness, he had gotten used to the constant pain, but now he didn't feel it at all. The man moved his legs interestedly, reached the kitchen, poured himself a mug of water. He was still weak, unable to do anything around the house, so Teresa was always taking care of him. Is Teresa home? He shouted in a hoarse voice. The answer to him was silence. Leaning his hand on the chair, the man lowered himself gingerly onto the couch. Only now Stephen noticed that there were various field herbs hanging near the stove, and some of them were arranged in a bouquet. Would this girl really get him back on his feet? The man did feel better, but he had so little faith in his cure that even feeling better did not add to his optimism. Stephen looked out the window and saw Patricia next to some guy. Apparently it was her boyfriend. He walked the girl all the way home, and Stephen overheard their conversation. Do you live here now? The boy asked. Yes, and it's better than home. Can I come in? Patricia said. You don't have to. People will see, and what will they say? What do I care what people say? I'm going to marry you. Let's just come in and have some tea. We can't. You don't live alone. The guy frowned. There's actually one person living there. I'm nursing him back to health. Why is he living there? Send him to the hospital and come live with me. I can't. The hospital won't help him. So, if he dies, he'll go to the hospital. Do you really choose to take care of a dying man instead of having a family life? Is he a relative of yours? No, he's just an ordinary man. And I felt sorry for him, Patricia replied. She wanted to go inside, but the guy continued. It's not normal. I know that you are very sensitive, always pitying everyone, helping everyone. But the fact that you're living with some strange man, I really don't like it. Come on, he's practically an invalid. What do I care? I want you to be my wife and take care of me and our family. I'm not your wife yet. Maybe you just don't want to marry me. I do. But I want to help this poor man too. He's been through something in his life that I can't just leave him. You know what? I'm done. It's either me or him. Are you crazy? You realize he's a stranger to me. I love you and I plan to build a family with you, the guy said. I understand that very well. You seem to be confused. The young man turned around to leave. Wait, Patricia grabbed his sleeve. This conversation is over. No, wait, I choose you. Then stop going to this house. Give me a couple more days, the girl begged. I'll just leave him food and medicine. Why can't you forget about him? Maybe you have something more than a cure there. You won't even let me in. And how can you blame me for this? I think it's obvious. You found yourself some city boy and you're living there with him. I'm not living with him, Patricia shouted in frustration. Suit yourself. But there are rumors all over the village. What rumors? Everyone saw that some man was brought there in an expensive car. I didn't see it. We were fighting with my stepmother at the time. What do they say about you in the village now? They say you're going to marry him. That can't be true. You should have seen him. He was barely alive when I found him. What difference does it make? He's a man. All right, here's the deal. If you stay in this house again tonight, I'll assume the rumors are true and we're done. Wait, give me a couple more days. I'm done. You're staying out of the house tonight, or will I never see you again? And I'll break off our engagement. Okay, I hear you. Patricia lowered her head. Stephen hurriedly lay down on his bed so that the girl would not guess that he had overheard their conversation. She walked into the house and approached the man's bed. The man pretended that he had just woken up. Stephen, it's me, Patricia said. Go back to sleep. What time is it? It's evening. I only came to make dinner, and then I'll come less often, just to bring you herbs. What do you mean, less often? Stephen was surprised. I thought you wouldn't come at all. If I don't help you, you'll die here, said Patricia. But what about? What? I thought you were going to leave me here. You overheard our conversation, Patricia guessed. No, I just thought, how much longer can you take care of an elderly stranger? You're young. You probably have your own personal life and I'm interfering with it. But don't think about it. The most important thing is that you get well. Stephen tried to stand up, but he couldn't. You don't have to work so hard. You'll be fine. I've changed my mind. I'll come to see you as often as I used to. I'll cook for you and make compresses. They seem to be helping a lot. Patricia, let's be honest. I'm beyond cure. You don't have to waste your youth on me. Don't be silly, said the girl and took the basket. I'll go and get some new herbs and make you some in the morning. If you want to eat, I left some soup on the table. Are you a holy man? Come on, don't be silly. I just cooked it for the household and brought you a plate. Good night. Patricia closed the door behind her and left. Stephen leaned back on his pillow and thought about how he had made life difficult for the girl. After thinking for a bit, he waited until nightfall, pulled himself together, and got out of bed. No, Patricia, I won't let you ruin your life for an old man like that. How happy she will be with this young man. With these words, he left the house and headed for the woods. As luck would have it, it began to rain rather heavily. Stephen was lying in the bushes, leaning against a large rock covered with moss. He began to feel the pain in his kidneys again, which throbbed all over his body and pulsed straight to his brain. But he continued to lie on the cold ground, exposing his face to the rain. At one point, he thought he heard someone walk into the bushes. The man heard mushroom pickers echoing somewhere far away. Not wanting to be found and rescued, he got on all fours and crawled deep into the forest. In helplessness, Stephen collapsed in the middle of the clearing and closed his eyes. He called for death, but it never came. Suddenly, he heard another rustle and opened his eyes. The man was stunned at what he saw. A few steps away from him stood the wolf and looked into his eyes. Stephen tried to get to his feet, but from weakness he could only crawl back and pressed his back against a tree. Here comes my death, he thought. I'd rather die of a wolf than of disease. Come on, pounce. Stephen spread his arms and closed his eyes. A few minutes passed, but nothing happened. He opened his eyes and saw the wolf standing right in front of him. Didn't you come here for me? Stephen asked. The wolf stood there without moving. Stephen looked closer and saw that the predator had a huge trap hanging from one paw. The wolf whimpered softly. Only now I noticed that the animal looked at me not with rage, but with a silent request in its eyes. Let me help you, Stephen said, and crawled gently over to the wolf. So you're pregnant too. What a strong trap. How can we open it? The she-wolf couldn't answer, just looked at him without taking her eyes off him. Nothing. We'll figure it out, said the man. He tried his best to open the iron jaws of the trap, but he failed. Stephen looked around and found a strong stick. This is going to hurt a little, he warned. Stephen slipped the stick into the trap and pushed down on it as hard as he could. The she-wolf howled in pain, but after a few seconds the trap opened, and she pulled out her bleeding paw. That's it, Stephen said, trying to catch his breath. Let me bandage you up, or you'll get an infection. He tore a sleeve from his shirt and carefully tied it around the animal's paw. That's it. Go home. After expending the rest of his strength, Stephen lay down on the ground and fell asleep. What was his amazement when he woke up at dawn and saw that the she-wolf was still sitting next to him. "What are you doing?" "Go home," said the man. The she-wolf got up and went into the bushes, but then immediately returned. She looked at Stephen and poked her nose into his shoulder. "Do you want something from me?" he asked. The she-wolf gently took him by the surviving sleeve with her teeth and dragged him somewhere. "Do you want me to follow you?" "Did one of your relatives fall into the trap too?" Stephen joked. He got up on woozy legs and followed the she-wolf. After walking about 100 meters, she stopped and started digging in the ground. "What have you got there, wolf?" asked the man. She looked back and forth at the ground, then at Stephen, and continued digging a hole. With a big paw. "There's something buried here. Let me give you a hand." The man took a stick and started digging with the she-wolf. They dug a pretty deep hole. Suddenly something shiny appeared from under the ground. "What is that?" Stephen was surprised. He dropped the stick and began to clean the object with his hands. Some kind of box. Stephen turned it around and soon was able to get the find. With a little effort, the man pulled off the hinges. The lid fell off and the crate opened. Seeing the contents, Stephen even shrieked. "So, it's gold." He looked at the she-wolf, who sat beside him and wagged her tail. "Did you find the treasure?" "Thank you. That's what you thanked me for saving you." The she-wolf looked him in the eyes, licked his palm, and disappeared into the forest. Stephen didn't realize how he got home. He dragged the heavy trunk into the hay. "Where have you been?" "I was frightened," Patricia exclaimed. "I've been waiting here for you for 2 days. I was worried sick." "Why did you come?" "I promised you that I would be looked after." "I told you not to come," Stephen replied. He was exhausted, but he found the strength to walk to the kitchen and drink a mug of water. "Now I'm glad you're here," said Stephen. "Look, I opened the trunk." Patricia jumped up and down in amazement. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I found the treasure," said Stephen. "Look, all the gold belongs to us now. We're rich now." "What do you mean?" "A treasure." Patricia was afraid to go near such treasures, but curiosity got the better of her. "Careful," Stephen warned her. "Yes, it was buried in the woods, just like that." "How did you find it?" "It's a long story, and it would be very hard to believe anyway. I'll tell you this, God must have taken pity on us." "You're very rich now," Patricia said with admiration as she looked inside the chest. "Are you rich too?" Stephen asked. "What are you talking about? You're the one who found the treasure. I'm really happy for you. I think justice has been done." "Don't be silly," said Stephen. He took the basket with which Patricia had gone to fetch the herbs and dropped a few handfuls of gold coins into it. "This is to thank you for all you've done for me." "I can't," Patricia exclaimed. "You can only imagine how surprised your stepmother will be when you bring it all home." "I don't think she'll be happy for me," Patricia laughed. She hesitantly picked up the basket and tried to lift it. But how heavy it was. "Is all this really happening to us?" "I couldn't believe it myself at first," answered Stephen. "What are we going to do about all this? Perhaps you and I should go to town and exchange it for money. How much will it be?" The man stood up, took the chest with both hands and tried to estimate its weight. "I think it's about 10 kilograms. I'm the one who gave you a little more." "How much is 1 kilogram?" Patricia asked. "I don't know, but I think it's expensive. When my wife was a rich woman, she used to buy gold bars from the bank. If I remember correctly, she paid $5 million for 1 bar. And these are coins, jewelry. They must be worth more than that." "God," Patricia sat back in her chair and covered her face with her hands. "I've never held that kind of money in my hands." Stephen asked, "Can someone take us into town?" "Yes, my neighbor is a good friend. He has a car," Patricia replied. "I'll ask him and he'll drive us." "Ask him right now," said Stephen. "I can't wait either." Patricia threw herself around Stephen's neck and then bounced, blushed, covered her mouth with her hand and ran out of the house. A neighbor agreed to drive them back in half an hour. In town, Stephen and Patricia walked into the nearest pawn shop. "Good afternoon." "Do you change gold?" Stephen asked. "Sure," replied the full-figured woman behind the counter. "But I'm about to start lunch." "Help us, please," said Patricia, and with great difficulty put the basket of gold on the counter. "How much will it cost?" "Will you be able to give us the money right away?" "What the hell is this?" The pawn shop owner even reached for her thick glasses. "This is real gold. We've already checked," said Stephen. "How did you get so much?" "We found the treasure," Patricia replied. "Oh, lucky," the woman said enviously as she checked the contents. It was indeed gold, and of very good quality. She lifted the basket with difficulty and put it on the scale. "And here's some more." Patricia set down the rest of the gold from the chest. "Do you really want to sell all this?" the owner asked. "Yes, we want to take the money," Stephen nodded. The woman left and returned with a black bag. "But it depends," she said. "Yes, but you'll have to wait." "We're in no hurry," Stephen said, sitting down in an antique chair. The owner counted the money and announced the amount. "It's done. It's almost 150 million. "How much?" Patricia asked with delight and horror. "Are you sure it's that much?" "At market value," the woman replied. "We're fine with it." "Thank you for your work," Stephen said as he counted out several $5,000 bills and took the money. "So it's no big deal. You had to sacrifice your lunch for us. God bless you." The woman crossed them. They walked out of the pawn shop and got back into the car. Stephen generously handed the driver some bills. "This is for your services. Thanks for the ride," he said. "Yes, I helped out as a neighbor, but I wouldn't say no to money," the driver replied, happily tucking the bills under his cap. "Where to now?" Patricia asked. "First to the bank. It's not safe to walk around the village with that kind of money, and then we can celebrate in a restaurant," Stephen said. "That would be great," exclaimed Patricia. "Ouch," said Stephen suddenly, grabbing his lower back. "Does it hurt?" "It'll go away. It doesn't matter now. If I die, I'll bequeath all this money to you," he said to Patricia. "You won't die. You were on the mend before you decided to run away," she said, and stroked his shoulder. "It's okay. Maybe I'll live a little longer." "Now you have something to live for," Stephen said, looking at Patricia. "You don't have anyone else, do you?" "No," she answered sadly. "I wish I had a daughter like you." "What are you talking about?" Patricia said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Did God send me a father and me a daughter?" They hugged each other tightly. The driver lit a cigarette, started the car, and drove towards the bank. Catherine walked around her huge summer house. Things were going badly in her business, and she had to sell off the property. How much money and effort had she invested in fixing up the dacha? Now the woman was waiting for the buyer to arrive and they would formalize the deal. A white Mercedes stopped at the gate. A well-dressed man and a young girl got out of it. "Good afternoon," Catherine said affably. Suddenly she was startled to recognize in the man her ex-husband Stephen. "Stephen, what is the meaning of all this?" she asked. "Good afternoon," coldly greeted her man. "So you are the buyer?" "Yes, my daughter and I want to buy this cottage," he answered. Catherine glanced at the girl dressed entirely in white. Patricia held in her hand an expensive handbag made of good leather. "When did you have such an adult daughter?" Catherine asked in surprise. "We are related recently," answered Stephen. "You mean that all your married life you hid from me that you had children?" "I adopted her," he said, and strode resolutely through the gate and into the garden. "It's as lovely as ever, and the price is right." "Don't you have enough money to put on a clown show?" Catherine laughed harshly. "I have the money. At least enough to buy this lot and the house." "How much are you asking?" "10 million, said the woman, thinking that such a high price will scare away the man. But Stephen only smiled and took a wad of money out of his pocket. "I can pay cash." "That can't be." Catherine took the money and texted it for Light. "It's real. You didn't think I'd cheat you, did you?" "Wait a minute. It's probably a surprise to you that I'm alive at all, isn't it?" "Don't say that," Catherine asked. Why not? It's the truth. You were hoping I'd die. You wouldn't get your hands dirty. But that's not what happened. Why did you suddenly decide to sell your favorite summer house? I want to buy a bigger one, Catherine lied. And anyway, it's none of your business. If you want to buy, buy. You're lying again, Stephen said. I remember how much you loved this cottage and would never trade it for anything else. So you have a big money problem. And judging by the fact that there's no car parked outside the house, you came here by train. And don't tell me that's what you wanted. You hate trains? Catherine lost her eyes. You're right. Things got really bad and I had to sell the whole business for a penny. Now I've got a job at the store and I'm starting over. Well, I can't say I sympathize with you, Stephen said. I didn't expect you to sympathize, Catherine replied. But if you want to know the truth, I'm really sorry for what I did to you. I have borne my punishment. The woman sadly finished and gave the keys to her ex-husband, Stephen. Do they tear your beloved cottage from your heart? Stephen asked with some sympathy. Don't worry, we'll keep it looking its best. Your roses will bloom even better than they do now. Thank you, Catherine said and walked out the wicket. She closed it, took one last look back and walked towards the station. She was starting a new life now. A life she deserved. The poor family used their last pennies to feed and shelter the little stray. And when the janitor saw, "Is there going to be anything to eat in this house today, or what?" the head of the family asked loudly and indignantly. "Alex, darling, but we just had dinner." Kate looked at her husband in surprise, who was sitting in front of an empty plate, holding a spoon in his hand, and looked at her expectantly. She had fed the whole family a modest dinner, and she didn't understand exactly what was required of her. The children had long since eaten and gone to their rooms to do their own things. "So it was dinner?" Alex asked ironically. "And I thought that a man should have at least some meat. You can be satisfied with cabbage leaves for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm actually working, bringing money into the family. I thought I was entitled to a decent meal for that money." Kate bit her lip. She realized, belatedly, that the old story was starting again. The same old story that repeated itself every time the month came to an end. Each time her husband approached this conversation in a different way than the previous one. That was why the woman didn't immediately realize what he meant. She sighed heavily. She didn't want to start this useless argument again, which would only lead to another quarrel and nothing more. She had heard all of Alex's arguments many times before. And many times she had answered them with her own. But the couple had never been able to come to an agreement. Nothing new. Kate was sure of it. Neither of them had ever come up with one, which meant that continuing this conversation would be just as pointless as before. Nevertheless, she knew her husband was waiting for her answer, and keeping silent wasn't an option either. She had tried this tactic 2 or 3 times before, and the result had not pleased her at all. Kate began gently. "We've already discussed this many times. Is it worth it again?" "This argument is worth it," her husband interrupted her firmly. "We're going to have this conversation until the situation changes. Or rather, until you get a job," Alex said. "I can't support all of you forever." Kate splayed her hands. "Honey, but how can I go to work? They don't take the younger ones at daycare. There's no places anywhere. We wouldn't have enough for a nanny even if I got a job. But others manage without nannies. They have grandparents, brothers, sisters, but we have no one. I'm an orphan and your parents don't want to babysit so I can get a part-time job. And don't blame it on my parents again. They raised their own kids and they don't have to take care of yours." Kate froze in place. Even as she stopped washing the dishes, the word alone hurt her as if her husband had hit her. A physical blow would have been less painful. "What do you mean? With mine," she exclaimed. "They are our children, Alex. You wanted them as much as I did." Alex smirked. I did, but I changed my mind. We didn't agree that I was going to carry the whole bunch. I thought you'd be on maternity leave, and then, like normal people, you'd go to work. And since you're a housewife, the kids are your responsibility. I had nothing to do with them. Kate felt as if someone had squeezed her throat. Alex never said anything like that. Yes, he'd complained that he was single-handedly feeding his family on his small salary. Yes, lamented that his wife couldn't provide him with what he thought he needed. But never claimed that their shared children had nothing to do with him. As if reading her thoughts and seeing her condition perfectly, Alex seemed to have decided to finally finish his wife off. And as for those youngest ones, which you so justify your laziness with, I'm not sure that they are from me at all. I worked all day while you were on maternity leave. There's no telling who might have visited you. Kate couldn't bear to hear such unfair accusations, choking back tears. She rushed out of the kitchen and, without realizing how, found herself in the nursery. 6-year-old Sam was looking after his younger brother and sister. He looked up at her in surprise. "Mummy?" he asked in a tone that was unusually serious for his age. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, son. It's all right." Kate belatedly realized her mistake and tried to wipe away her tears discreetly. The boy looked at her attentively, and then shifted his gaze to the younger children and nodded slowly. Obviously, he thought that his mum didn't want to disturb the babies, so he tried to pretend that everything was all right. Kate didn't bother to dissuade him and just quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day Sam would have more important things to do and would not remember the incident. The woman had no idea where to put her grief. There were only 2 rooms in the flat, the children's room and the adult room. And in the second one, her husband could come at any moment. Kate didn't want to see him now. Besides, she suspected that he would not give up so easily and would continue to annoy her with his remarks. There was only one way out, despite the late hour, to leave the flat. Of course, it was undesirable to leave the children virtually alone. On the other hand, in such a state, she would not be able to interact with them normally. And so, whether there is an adult in the flat or not does not matter much. The younger ones would still be in Sam's care. At least Kate had no doubt that he'd put them to bed properly, and he'd go to bed on time too. Her son, responsible beyond his years, loved to play with his brother and sister. Of course, the woman tried not to let the children be left alone for long periods of time. But when Sam took to tutoring the younger ones in her presence, she could see that he was doing a fine job. Yes, she was lucky to have a son, and that was the only consolation she had at the moment. She wandered aimlessly down the street, hardly looking around, not even noticing the small and nasty rain that had started. All her thoughts were focused on one single question: how she had come to such a life, how her happy youthful love had ended with her husband openly accusing her of infidelity without any reason. Kate recalled how they met. She is a young economics student at one of the country's leading universities. He was a promising young entrepreneur. Together they seemed to others, and to themselves, just a perfect couple, though their relationship developed like in some romantic fairy tale. Courtship, gifts, restaurants, huge, gorgeous bouquets of flowers. They both had big futures ahead of them, and hardly anyone could have imagined the poverty and doom in which these people now found themselves. And this fall began, perhaps, at the very moment when Alex began to persistently persuade his future wife to leave the institute. "Why would you do that?" he questioned. "My income is enough for 2 people. You will stay at home, cook, clean, bring up the children, after all." At first, Kate flatly refused to even hear about it. Raised in an orphanage, who had all chances to be at the bottom of life, she, by incredible diligence, and by some miracle managed to get into decent society and now held on to this opportunity with all her might. In the end, however, Alex managed to persuade her that this wonderful new world was not going to get away from her anyway, and at first everything was really good. Kate, as Alex had planned, was doing everyday life in their common house while he was doing his business. They had enough money, even with a surplus. Nevertheless, somehow it didn't work out. There were always some unnecessary but pleasant things that they wanted to buy right now, and perhaps none of them thought that any savings were necessary at that time. "My parents will help us in case of anything," Alex assured his young wife when she timidly started a conversation on the subject. "You know they're not." Poor Kate still didn't know if he believed what he was saying, or if he was deceiving her. Surely that very critical situation would never happen. Anyway, after a while something happened to his business. Kate, without going into details, admitted only that over time it began to give less and less profit until it finally collapsed completely. And at that moment it turned out that Alex's parents were not going to help the young family. "Except for you," his father told him. "We have younger children who are not yet on their feet. And you are a grown man, and you have to deal with your problems on your own." Then they had to sell the big, fancy flat they lived in and move to a small 2-room flat on the outskirts of the city. Strangely enough, Alex himself was the most dissatisfied with this state of affairs. Apparently, it was the fact that he had spent his whole life in luxury, and now he was forced to live a rather miserable existence. Kate took it with philosophical calmness. She, of course, was also accustomed to a poor life, but she had once led it, and therefore was more prepared for hardship and knew what to do in such circumstances. Quite quickly she found a job. She got a job as a saleswoman in a shop. The salary, of course, was modest, but it was better than nothing. She didn't see any other options for herself. Alex chose a completely different way of solving problems. He went on a long-term binge. Kate didn't blame her husband for anything. Everything happens in life. On the contrary, as a decent wife, she tried to inspire him, calm him down, and support him. And in the end, her endeavors succeeded. Alex stopped drinking and started to develop new business ideas that would allow their family to return to its former wealth and prosperity. However, these ideas always failed. Even if he managed to save the initial sum and start a new business, quite quickly there were all sorts of difficulties that brought Alex's efforts to naught. And the longer it went on, the more unbearable his character became. "I don't have enough money to fully realize my projects," he told Kate frankly. "But what can I do, darling?" she replied. "I'm already taking all the extra shifts I can. I'm working almost no weekends. I just don't have anywhere else to take the time to earn more," Kate said. "Of course, if I'd finished university, it would have been a lot easier. But what's to be sorry about now? This situation should be a lesson to both of us. I need to finish my studies and get a proper job. Besides, like I said, I'll need to save up. But of course, those are plans for when we get out of this." "How would we get out of it?" her husband Alex resented. "Well, so that there's more money?" "Maybe," Kate said, stammering shyly, "you could find yourself some part-time work, at least for the weekend." "I don't have time for that," Alex said categorically. "In case you haven't noticed, while you're working for pennies, I'm trying to rebuild the business and bring us back to our former position. And you're not helping me at all." "But I'm really doing the best I can," Kate replied with surprise. No, her husband objected with obvious irritation in his voice. "Not everything. There's something you haven't done. Though I've explained to you repeatedly how important it is to me and to you." "Honey, you seem to forget that even though I didn't get a full education, I studied economics for 2 years. What you're suggesting is absolutely insane. Maybe you'll finally start trusting me on things I do know something about." "You just don't believe in me?" Alex answered in a frustrated voice. "You think that once I made a mistake once, I'll repeat them all the time, and I'll never succeed again." After such statements, Kate, of course, immediately rushed to convince her husband that he was deeply mistaken, and no one believes in him as much as she does. Eventually, this conversation would end with nothing, only to begin again the next day. However, no matter how hard Alex tried, there was no way Kate could agree to his plan. And he proposed a very simple thing: to take a large loan in her name, to let this money into business for him, bankrupt and officially unemployed. No bank was willing to lend. So he could not release his idea without his wife's help. Kate urged him to think about how they would pay back the loan in case of another failure. She was absolutely sure that it was not the way to restore the former status, but to an even deeper hole. And luckily for her, she never gave in to any entreaties from her husband. And then she got pregnant with Sam, and Alex had to leave all his business ideas behind and get a job to be able to feed his family, which was soon to be even bigger. Of course, he wasn't thrilled at the prospect. Both spouses were still convinced that this situation was temporary. Kate did not plan to sit on maternity leave for a long time and was going to go to work as soon as she arranged Sam in the nursery. But even this plan was not destined to come true. There were no places in kindergartens, and soon enough Kate realized that the nursery was nothing to dream of. Well, if the queue will come up in 3 or 4 years. And then it happened that she got pregnant again, just when Sam was 3 and she'd already had 2 children. That's when Alex started talking about going back to work. She realized it herself. But how could she do that with 3 small children in her arms? As time went on, her husband became more and more insistent, and the situation didn't change, which eventually led to the ugly conflict that happened that unfortunate evening. That was what Kate was thinking about as she wandered aimlessly in the darkness of the night through the streets of the neighborhood that had become almost dear to her for so many years. Fortunately, although it was on the outskirts of the city, it was considered quite prosperous. Crime was rare here, so it was safe to travel even at this late hour. However, that was the last thing on the woman's mind. Suddenly, a strange thing caught her attention. Kate, immersed in her own unhappy thoughts and memories, did not immediately realize what had alarmed her. Just somewhere in her subconsciousness, it was as if a neon sign flashed, informing her that something in the space around her was wrong. Snapping out of her own musings, the woman looked around and quite quickly discovered the cause of her vague unease. It was a little girl the same age as her Sam. In her smart pink dress, she was sitting on the curb all by herself, staring at the pavement beneath her feet. Kate raised her eyebrows in surprise. She'd never met any street kids in her neighborhood. Not beggars. Beggars, or just wandering the streets, especially at a time like this. Still, there were decent enough people living here to let kids out alone at night. Not rich enough for beggars to be interested in the neighborhood. Besides, the girl didn't look like a street kid, or even just a child from a dysfunctional family. She wore beautiful and clean, obviously new clothes, and she did not behave like a little tramp. The whole situation surprised Kate very much. But this surprise was unimportant, as if it were background. With her mind, she realized all these details much later, when once again she replayed this strange meeting in her head. Now she was only interested in one thing: the child was out at night, so she was in potential danger. It was necessary to give this girl all possible help. With this in mind, she approached the child carefully, so as not to frighten her, and squatted down in front of her so that their faces were at the same level. "Hello," she said quietly and affably. "What is your name?" "I don't know," the girl answered surprisingly calmly. "What is it?" Kate was surprised. "It's like this. I mean, I probably knew it once, but I forgot it." "And who are your parents, and where are they?" "I don't know. I mean, I don't remember," she said. "Do you remember anything at all?" Kate asked cautiously. This time the girl did not say anything and just shook her head silently. The woman, however, was not satisfied with this answer. "But how did you get here?" "I came," she answered. "From where?" From there, the child waved her hand indifferently, showing the direction. "What was there? Was it a forest or a park?" "I don't know. I woke up there and didn't remember anything. I just went somewhere. And now I was tired, so I decided to sit." Kate shook her head, perplexed. She didn't like the situation, and she had no idea what she should do about it. Finally, after some silence and thought, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded vigorously, signaling that she hadn't eaten in a long time. "All right," Kate sighed tiredly. "Come with me, I'll feed you and you'll sleep in our flat with my children. And in the morning we'll think about what to do with you. And for convenience, I'll call you Mary for now. Do you mind?" "No," answered the new Mary very indifferently. Taking the girl's hand firmly in hers, Kate went home. All her own troubles and sorrows immediately went out of her mind. That was just the way she was. If someone needed help, her own problems were pushed to the back of her mind. Especially for her, as a mother, she couldn't bear the situation with a neglected child who couldn't even remember his own name. When they reached the flat without any incident, it was already about 2. All of Kate's housemates, as she was immediately convinced, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The woman was even pricked by a vague resentment. None of them seemed to care where she was at such a late hour. On the other hand, this state of affairs could not please her. Kate had no desire to explain to the children and her husband, especially her husband, where the girl had come from and why she was in their flat. She quietly went to the kitchen, took out the remains of a modest dinner from the fridge and fed the little waif. Once she was full, the girl began to yawn desperately. It was clear that Mia had not only not eaten for a long time, but had not slept for a long time. Kate decided to make up a bed for her on the couch, but she settled down on the floor and, exhausted from the day's work, fell asleep quickly, forgetting to set her alarm clock. As a rule, she got up before anyone else in the house. After all, she had to make breakfast, get her husband ready for work, and her eldest son off to school. Besides, she was the only one in the family who was a lark, and early rising was not only habitual but pleasant for her. But of course, this did not apply when she had to go to bed late. In such circumstances, it was extremely difficult to wake up without an alarm clock. Naturally, Kate overslept, and her awakening was not the most pleasant, as she woke up to someone shaking her roughly by the shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she saw Alex's angry face right in front of her. "I'm late for work," he exclaimed, noticing that his wife had opened her eyes. "Breakfast isn't ready. Are you still asleep?" "Not in bed, but on the kitchen floor." "And explain to me, please, who is that girl snoring on the sofa?" For the first few moments, Kate didn't even realize which girl he was talking about. Then she remembered her night's adventures and tried to explain to Alex what was going on. He listened with a skeptical expression on his face. Then he said that when he got home from work, Mia wouldn't be in their house. Without breakfast, he left for work, leaving Kate to recover. However, even this luxury was beyond her reach. In just a few minutes, the woman realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to just wake Sam up, let alone getting him ready for school. And sure enough, the baby was sleeping peacefully in his cot. And if Alex was already late for work, it was time for Sam to leave the house. For the first time that morning, Kate looked at the clock and clutched her head. Her son's first class was due to start in 10 minutes. She woke Sam up, made him a quick breakfast, and sent him off to class. It wasn't a long walk to school, and the boy could manage on his own. Nevertheless, Kate realized that he was going to be late anyway, which meant that he, and therefore she, would soon be in trouble. However, Kate wasn't going to think about that right now, as she had other difficulties that required immediate action. Fortunately, all the commotion that had been going on in the house for the previous half an hour had not disturbed Mia's sound sleep. Her savior decided to wait until the girl woke up on her own. In the meantime, she would take care of her own small children and think about what she should do. It took 2 hours for the girl to get up. And by that time, Kate had already developed a clear plan of action. It was time for a walk with the kids, and she decided, taking Mia with her, to look at the nearest police station. After all, that was what law enforcement was for, to deal with cases like this. "So you found this girl on the street last night?" the officer on duty at the station asked her. "That's right. And she can't even remember her name," Kate confirmed again. "That's right. She didn't understand the point of this procedure. The woman had already told the whole story once, and then told it again in a written statement. And now, reading her statement, the police officer for some reason again reiterated literally all the circumstances that she had already repeatedly disclosed. "Why didn't you go to the police immediately?" he asks. "You see, I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that it was necessary to do exactly that," Kate sighed. "The important thing is that you did it now," the duty officer replied. Mia didn't seem to realize it was about her. Or she did, but she didn't think much of it. Instead, she was looking at the room they were in with interest. Though, to Kate's mind, there was nothing fascinating or even simply beautiful about it. Nor could there be. "And what do you plan to do with the child?" the policeman asked after a moment's silence. "What do you mean?" Kate was surprised. The question had shocked her before it was asked. The woman sincerely believed that now the girl's fate was the responsibility of law enforcement officers. "Directly," answered the duty officer indifferently. "We can put her in a special institution, or let her stay with you for the time being." Kate's eyes darkened. The choice she was being offered was impossible. On the one hand, her husband had made it quite clear that she would not be here by this evening, and she realized that they couldn't afford another child. She could barely manage with her own. It was all understandable and logical. But the other side of the coin was in the word special institution, orphanage. It was unthinkable to let this girl go there. Kate remembered very well, despite the years that had passed, how difficult it had been for her to live and grow up in the orphanage, how she had had to endure the bullying of other children and the cruel punishments of the carers. For her, it was all in the past. She had endured and overcome everything. But she was born into a dysfunctional family and lost even the parents she had. She was used to hardship since she was a child. For her, this kind of treatment was the order of the day. Mia, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. It was immediately clear that she was a homely, loved, maybe even a little spoilt child, and also with an obvious mental trauma, since she did not remember her past, or even her real name. It was absolutely obvious to Kate that this girl simply would not survive in the harsh conditions of the orphanage. Of course, at that moment, the woman didn't have time to think long and hard. But it was undoubtedly her reflection that motivated her decision. Looking into the eyes of the duty officer, she answered firmly, "The girl will stay with us." "That's fine," the policeman replied. He had obviously expected such an answer, and when he received it, he suddenly opened up. "I'm from an orphanage myself, and I can see that this girl doesn't belong in such an institution." "That's what I thought," Kate said coldly. As a matter of fact, he went on, not noticing her tone, "It's not exactly in the rules to leave her with you, but I'll try to sort it out." "All right," the woman said. "Can we go now?" "Yes, of course. If anything comes to light about the little girl's relatives, we'll call you. But to tell you the truth, I'd advise you to start your own search. You know, sometimes the internet can do more than the police." When Kate finally got home, she found a distraught Sam there. He had already returned from school and grimaced as he showed his mother his diary, which contained a note about his lateness and the fact that the class teacher had called her in. "I'm sorry, Mum," the son said guiltily. "I should have got up myself in the morning." "No, you didn't," Kate replied. "You know it's my job to wake everyone up in the morning. Not because it's my job or anything like that, but because that's what we agreed. So I'm the one who should be apologizing to you." From their conversation, it would appear that no other girl was present in the flat. Sam, though he looked at her with some bewilderment, tactfully didn't ask any questions. Once again, Kate thought about how lucky she was to have a son who, unlike many, even the twins, had been a perfectly calm child in early childhood. Leaving the younger children in the care of the older ones, Kate set about preparing dinner. Then everyone sat down at the table. To the woman's surprise, Sam and Mia had somehow managed to become friends and were chatting animatedly about something of their own. It wasn't until after the meal, when the girl wasn't around, that her son approached her with an obvious question. "Mum, is Mia going to live with us now?" I asked her, but she doesn't know. "For now, yes," son Kate replied. "The girl is lost and she needs help. If we don't take her in, she'll go to an orphanage." "It's a good thing she's staying," Sam concluded abruptly. "Why?" Mum wondered. The younger ones, like her Sam, told her seriously. "So it'll be easier for you and me now." Kate laughed softly, ruffled his hair, and went about her usual chores: laundry, cleaning, preparing dinner for her husband. She preferred not to think about what would happen when he returned from work. However, the scandal exceeded all her expectations. "What is this?" he almost shouted, coming into the kitchen. "Are you not enough of your own? Some other girl picked up?" "She's not a girl." Kate stood up for the girl. "And anyway, it's only temporary until her parents are found. We can't let her end up in an orphanage. Look at her. She's a totally homeschooled kid. There's nothing for her there. There's an institution for people like her. She has nothing to do here," he interrupted. "Have you thought about our charity? How are we going to feed her, clothe her, and all the other costs of supporting a child? What do you know about child-related expenses?" Kate suddenly flared up, even to herself. "Have you ever bought anything for them? Do you have any idea what a child's needs are?" She didn't know what had prompted her to start this accusatory speech. Perhaps it was just a resentment that had built up in her soul over the years, and now she needed to vent it somewhere. Her husband listened to her angry confession unusually quietly, without interrupting or objecting. He must not have expected such pressure from his wife, usually affectionate, calm, even in conflict situations. And Kate kept talking and talking, expressing everything that had accumulated in her soul. And about the fact that the money that he earns, categorically not enough to live. And that it could have been avoided if he had got a job at once, instead of sitting on her dependence for several years. She even reminded him of the various excesses he allowed himself after the birth of their children, while she herself had to count the pennies he gave her to feed and clothe the whole family. She spoke, of course, not only about money, but also about how their relationship had deteriorated, how she missed the former love and romance. Not only and not so much flowers and gifts. Of course not. She'd like some simple human attention, and at least a little warmth and involvement instead of constant unfair reproaches. "Well," Alex said in a completely calm tone when Kate finally finished her monologue, "I understand that all of you will be much better without me than with me." This ominous phrase hung in the air, and the man, without saying another word, took out a large suitcase from the wardrobe in the room and began to pack his belongings into it. Kate, it would seem, should have, seeing this, started crying, apologizing, telling her husband how much she loved him, urging him not to make hasty decisions. And only 2 days ago she would have done so, but now she looked at what was happening with a coldness that killed her. Alex was getting ready at an emphasized leisurely pace and occasionally glanced at Kate. Obviously, he expected the usual reaction from her too, and most likely he wanted to scare the woman more than actually going to leave. If so, his plan hadn't worked, and once the suitcase was fully packed, there was nowhere to retreat to. "To hell with you." He threw angrily at his wife and slammed the front door behind him. Kate stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few more minutes, then waved goodbye and went into the nursery. There, Mia and Sam did their best to calm the younger children, obviously frightened by the ugly scene in the kitchen. The older ones were as pale as chalk, but, feeling responsible, tried not to panic. The woman hugged all 4 of them tightly. "Is Daddy not coming back?" Sam finally asked. Kate noted that there was not an ounce of regret or joy in his voice. He didn't really care whether Dad came back or not. He was just clarifying information. This man, who rarely came home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe he'll come back in a while." So the five of them, the four children and Kate herself, began to live together. And if at first she feared that, without her husband's help, she would not be able to cope with such a crowd of hungry mouths, she soon discovered that this was not the case. On the contrary, without constant scandals and ridiculous demands, to live much easier and calmer. This despite the fact that there was no money for household expenses. Alex allocated a very tiny amount from his salary, while Kate paid the bulk of them from her maternity and child allowances. However, there was a deadline when the money was going to run out, and that was a bit of a problem. Kate realized there was no way she could go full-time with 4 young children. But suddenly, with Alex gone, she had the energy and time to slowly start looking for part-time options. And here she was, helped by several happy accidents at once. First, she received a call from the headmistress of the kindergarten, where her children were waiting in line for admission, without saying anything specific over the phone. She urged Kate to come to the institution as soon as possible for a personal conversation. "Hello," the headmistress said when she met her. "I understand that you have been waiting for a long time for your children to be able to enter our kindergarten." "So long that one of them has already gone to school," Kate said, a little irritated. "I'll tell you a secret," the headmistress said. "By the time you get your turn, the younger ones will have already gone to school. A lot of people don't have a garden. Unfortunately, we have far more children than places." "Don't look at me like that. I didn't invent it, and it's not in my power to change it." "So, you called me here just to tell me we don't stand a chance?" "On the contrary, I called you here to suggest a solution to this problem. You see, we had another nanny leave the nursery some time ago. Nobody stays long, you know, and we can't find a new one. The rest of the staff are scrambling and about to leave. So I thought I should offer this vacancy to someone who has been waiting in line for a long time. I'll be honest, it's a lot of work and not much pay. But we can get your kids into an age-appropriate group right away." "And why are you offering it to me?" Kate asked suspiciously. "I don't even have a teaching degree. Surely there are more suitable candidates." "But you have 3 children of your own. Believe me, in the work that you have to do, it is much more important. However, I won't hide it. We also made such an offer to more suitable candidates, as you put it. But none of them accepted it. So we made a list of those who might be interested in such a deal, and you are not the first person I called about it. Does that answer satisfy you?" Kate was satisfied. Now she had some work to do, which could be combined with taking care of the younger children. The older ones were already independent enough to spend a few hours in the flat without her and cook their own lunch. Especially since the kindergarten was not far from both their school and home. Of course, they didn't live too well, but not worse than before Alex left. Life was starting to get better. And after a while, a second good thing happened. This time, Kate was called in by the same police officer on duty who had taken her statement about finding Mia in the street a few weeks ago. "Any news about her parents?" Kate asked hopefully. "Alas, no news," the policeman replied. "Like I told you, we're not very good at this sort of thing, especially since the data set on her is minimal. Didn't you try looking for her yourself?" "I didn't have time for that," the woman shrugged her shoulders. "I have 3 of my own besides her, you know. And my husband left recently." "So it's understandable," the policeman sighed. "But in fact, I called you for a very specific reason. You see, I've finally managed to formalize Mia's stay with you. That means you can put her in school and everything." "That's great," Kate glowed. The fact that Mia couldn't go to school really bothered the woman a lot. So far, she had been teaching her on her own, but she realized that the matter would have to be resolved before the next school year started. And summer was fast approaching, which meant that very soon the problem would become very acute. "Yes, besides, you become the girl's legal guardian. That, of course, comes with certain benefits. Plus, as I understand it, you'll qualify for certain allowances and benefits as a mother of many children. It worked out exactly as he said. Of course, money was always in short supply, but now at least Kate could be sure that the children would be clothed, fed, and educated. Contrary to her fears, life without Alex hadn't collapsed, not only financially, but emotionally as well. No matter how hard she tried, she was still unable to experience any feelings about his departure. Something in her must have faded at the very moment when her husband rashly accused her of infidelity, which was not the case. Such a reaction was very surprising to Kate herself. But for all that, she couldn't help but be pleased. With 4 children in her arms, it would be a shame to suffer for a love that had collapsed. On the other hand, perhaps the children contributed to her peace of mind. With all her worries, she had no time for sadness and despair. So 2 more years passed. For the convenience of all members of the family, the flat was conditionally divided into 2 halves, male and female. Mia and the youngest Tracy moved into Kate's room, where the adults used to live. Sam stayed in his room with his brother Cole. It was cramped, of course, but so far it hadn't caused any particular problems. Mia and Sam's friendship was growing stronger every day. They went to the same school now. True, the girl was a grade below them. The boy treated her like another little sister and looked after her in every possible way. With the younger children, she also had a great relationship. In short, despite her unexpected appearance, she perfectly fit into the family. Kate herself fell in love with the girl as her own daughter, and sometimes even forgot that this is not true. Mia, in turn, quite quickly got used to calling the woman Mum, and her children brothers and sisters. The day on which the little girl was discovered, they had amicably decided to consider it her birthday. It seemed quite symbolic to Kate. After all, who knows what might have happened to Mia if she hadn't caught her eye in time. In a way, it could be said that Alex's horrible scene that night had saved her from a much sadder fate. And while Kate was glad that Mia was now her daughter, she couldn't figure out if anyone was looking for her. On the advice of a policeman, she repeatedly advertised for the child, but to no avail. The police also did not succeed in finding her parents. Adding to the worry was the fact that the girl had never regained her true memories. It seemed that until the moment she woke up in the park, she simply did not exist in this world, which of course there was no way that could be true. And Kate really wanted to know what it was really like. But the various doctors at the public health center had just thrown up their hands. They had never dealt with such complicated cases and had no idea what to do. The only thing that one of the doctors was able to do was to give the contacts of a good private clinic specializing in helping children with memory loss. But the family, of course, had no money for that. Mia herself did not seem in the least disturbed by the lack of memories of the past. She was childishly naive and lived today, and knew only that this day is good for her. And what had been there before was not so important. Kate couldn't understand that either, and even envied her adopted daughter in some white way. She herself at her age wanted to know who her parents were and why they were no longer with her. And as a result, she so annoyed the tutor with her questions that she answered her honestly and directly they were drunkards, unnecessary and useless, just like you yourself. Then they died. And you fell on our heads. Did you get what you wanted? Happy? Now go clean the toilets. It's your turn today. Thinking back on the episode, Kate sometimes thought that maybe it was a good thing that Mia had no interest in her past. On the other hand, when the woman had found her, she hadn't looked at all like a kid who'd had a lot of bad luck in this life. Quite the opposite, in fact. And the thought often crossed her mind that it might have been much more comfortable and pleasant for the girl to live with her own family than with them. However, one way or another, Kate could not change anything in this situation, although she made every effort to do so. In the end, she resigned herself to the idea that they would never know the whole truth. And perhaps it was at that moment that she finally decided that the girl was not just temporarily living with her, but was a full-fledged member of her family. And then there was a question of not just being her guardian, but to fully adopt the child. And here she encountered a funny, and at the same time sad legal subtlety. Still in an official marriage, she could not do it without her husband's consent. That meant only one thing: she had to get a divorce. With a heavy heart, Kate dialed Alex's number. She didn't want to talk to the man, and she would have been much more willing to do it through the courts. But such a process would take much longer, and the woman hoped that her husband, with whom she hadn't had any contact for 2 years, would agree to just peacefully file a petition and go their separate ways, not only in fact, but also officially. "Katie," she heard Alex's affectionate voice in the phone. "I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you." Kate was taken aback. On the one hand, something hurt and at the same time sweetly pricked her heart. It was the way he'd spoken to her before the horror of what had happened to them. And for a moment, it was as if she were back in those happy times. On the other hand, it sounded so inappropriate now. "I know you miss me too, and you'll make the right decision in the end," Alex continued inspiringly. "You can't just leave your husband because of some street girl. You're calling to tell me that this problem is solved and I can come back." All the happy memories are gone. With the last phrase, her husband vividly reminded Kate of the reason why, when he left, she wasn't even too upset. So she replied in the coldest possible tone, "Alex, I'm calling to ask you for a divorce." "So you found a new man?" His voice immediately lost all viscosity. "That was quick, I'll give you that." "I didn't find anyone. It's none of your business. Not since you left me alone with 4 kids. Like you said, we got along just fine without you. And now I'd like to settle this last formality." "I didn't leave you," my husband said indignantly. "I just couldn't stay in the same flat with that girl, and I wasn't in a position to carry another child, so I've withdrawn from your life until you solve this problem." "Believe me, I've solved all my problems except the one I'm calling you about. Let's end this pointless conversation, Alex. I don't need you or my kids anymore." "Well," he sounded really angry. "In that case, sue me. I won't give you a divorce. But I suggest you think twice before you do it. And for example, remember that the flat you and I bought in marriage, it's a jointly acquired property. And now I have to live with my parents, who are not too keen on having me here. You see where I'm going with this?" With these words, he hung up the phone. Kate couldn't believe what she'd heard. Would he really not give her a divorce? Moreover, he threatened to deprive her and the children of their only home if she decided to do so. Was this really the romantic and loving young man she had once married? But she had nowhere to retreat. After a few more attempts to negotiate peacefully with her husband, she realized it was all useless. Either she gets rid of Mia and Alex returns home, or divorce through the court with the division of the flat. He wouldn't hear of any other options. "I realize you still need time to come to your senses," he said in one of those conversations. "And I'm in no hurry to make a decision. But since you've deigned to talk to me, I'm waiting for your decision. And even my patience isn't unlimited." Kate herself didn't want to drag this all out, maintaining a kind of status quo. It was clear that this issue could not be suspended indefinitely. It had to be dealt with right now. After all, Mia's formal adoption was also a kind of formality, just like this divorce. That's true. But what if, for example, she wanted to remarry? In the end, Kate made up her mind after all and applied to the court. Before doing so, she did one thing: she tried to explain to the children in terms they could understand that their living conditions could soon become even worse than they were before. And for a while at least, they would all have to live in a one-room flat. To her surprise and delight, everyone was sympathetic to such a decision. Alex kept his word and really tried to claim his share of the flat. However, unexpectedly, the court rejected his claim. The judge referred to the fact that all their children live in the flat with their mother. In addition, there is also the only place of residence of another child. Therefore, it is impossible to divide the flat in any way, except in the case if a part of children the former father will take to itself on permanent residence and education. There was an ominous silence in the hall. The children were too young for their opinion and desired to be taken into account by the court. Consequently, at this point, everything depended on Alex's answer. For a few minutes, he looked triumphantly at his former spouse. She understood that he didn't need children, but for the sake of torturing his nerves, he might agree to this proposal. And then they would face many months of new litigation, fighting for the children, which of course he would lose. But all of this will take time and money away from Kate, not to mention the stress. However, her husband apparently decided that he did not need these problems either, and agreed that the children let them stay with their mother, but in this case he is entitled to compensation in the amount of the market value of his share of the flat. The court agreed with this. However, given Kate's small income and the number of her dependents, she would have to pay this money in small sums over many years. Not that this decision satisfied any of the parties. Nevertheless, it was the only possible compromise. In Kate's family, this state of affairs was considered an absolute victory. The children, however she had prepared them, were terrified of the legal process, and especially of the prospect of being separated and forced to live with a father whom the younger ones did not even remember. And now that it was all behind them, the boys were jubilant. Besides, being a completely free woman and Mia's legal guardian, Kate, though not without difficulty, was able to get the girl officially adopted. This was the occasion for a big, by their standards, holiday. Inexpensive but tasty cake from the shop and a trip to the amusement park were to be its indispensable attributes. None of us have ever been to such a place in our lives, she told the children. But of course, each of you has dreamed of going there at least once. For 3 months, the woman saved up the little money she had. She spent all the money she could to save up for this trip and to give her children a real entertainment. And now the big day has come. The kids looked around with interest, trying to choose which of the various entertainments they would like to experience. Of course, trying everything at once was out of the question, and luckily even the little ones were well aware of these limitations. Only Mia, usually boisterous and cheerful, was unusually quiet. She was looking around with a strange expression on her face, as if she was wondering why she was in this place. But it was a very different kind of wonder from everyone else's. Mia paid little attention to the rides themselves. They seemed familiar to her. "Mia, are you all right?" Kate asked her, concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied in a quiet and colorless voice. This startled the woman even more. The tone of the child's voice was completely at odds with the meaning of her words, which was completely uncharacteristic of Mia. Open and trusting, she was not used to hiding her emotions. That's why her attempt to do so was a complete failure and alarmed her foster mother even more. Nevertheless, Kate did not continue the dialogue. She knew perfectly well that if Mia had any reason to try to hide her feelings, then no matter how much she questioned her, she would only succeed in making the girl even more withdrawn. Otherwise, there was a good chance that she would want to share her feelings. And that's what happened. Kate's own children, completely mesmerized by the surroundings, did not notice anything around them and argued passionately about which attraction should be tried first. Finally, they came to a common decision and went to the Ferris wheel. Mia suddenly refused to go with them, citing her fear of heights. No one tried to talk her out of it. She and Kate sat down on a bench, where they had a clear view of the cart the others had sat in, all the way round. An awkward silence reigned for some time. Then the girl interrupted it with a phrase which her foster parent least expected to hear. "Mum, don't be angry with me," she began, and then broke off half-heartedly, trying to see Kate's reaction in her eyes. "Was I ever angry with you?" she replied in surprise. "No," Mia said, embarrassed. "Well, you can now." "Why?" "Sunshine. What's wrong?" "You know, ever since we came to this park, I feel like I know it, like I've been here before. Maybe you have. It's not like I'm her again." Kate felt a sense of joyous anticipation. Could it be that memories are starting to come back for the girl? Could it be that her real parents really did take her to this particular park, or just a similar one? And now the surroundings are helping her recover her memory. So why should I be angry about it? Kate said. What if something you all remember about your childhood and your other parents? So what's the harm in that? Because then we'll know exactly what happened to you. Maybe we can even find those people and let them know that you're okay. But then they'd probably want to take me away, Mia exclaimed, almost terrified. It won't be that easy, Kate tried to reassure her. You're 9 years old, maybe more. We don't even know that for sure. You've seen for yourself the other day that a trial isn't a quick process, and you can't do without it once you're 10. You can decide what kind of family you want to live with, and then maybe you'll like your birth parents better than me. No, Mia pouted. How can you know that? They abandoned me, she said with a childish firmness. Maybe they didn't abandon you, but lost you and can't find you, Kate said. I'm used to you anyway, you and your brothers and sister. I've been trying hard not to remember anything for a long time now, so that. Mia couldn't find the right words. Kate understood her perfectly well enough so that she wouldn't have to make that impossible choice. I mean, she probably loved her real parents too, and if she remembered them, the feelings might return. But her new family was already practically her own. Look, Kate said as gently as she could. You may think there are only 2 options, but there are so many more. If we find your real parents, you don't have to say goodbye to us forever. You'll be able to visit us, play with your brothers and sister, and do it quite often, I assure you. Mia rounded her eyes. It seemed that such an option had never occurred to her at all, but now her thoughts were flowing in that direction. And the girl calmed down a little, realizing that things were not as hopeless as she had imagined. Unfortunately, Kate could not say the same about herself. She was not at all sure that her own soothing words were true. There was no telling how long the conversation would have gone on, or where it would have led, had it not been interrupted in a rather unceremonious manner. A man dressed in an amusement park employee's uniform approached them. He had a broom in his hands, and he didn't look the most welcoming. Nevertheless, when he spoke, his words sounded polite and without any aggression. Hello. I apologize, but your daughter looked very familiar. Isn't that Emily by any chance? When she heard that name, the girl perked up. From the outside, she was like a lost dog who in the casual conversation of strangers heard her name. She stared intently at the park worker, as if trying to remember if she had met him before. You see, here's the thing, Kate said, choosing her words carefully. We don't know for sure, and we can't rule out that it is her. The fact is that this girl was found about 3 years ago, quite far from this place. She was wandering the street at a very childlike time. Remembered absolutely nothing of her past and unfortunately still doesn't to this day. If you really know her, Kate continued, but the park worker interrupted her. 3 years ago, he exclaimed in a daze. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's when I or anyone else last saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger then, but the resemblance is striking. Tell me the story from the beginning, Kate suggested. At that time, the children who had been on the Ferris wheel returned. However, the eldest son Alex realized from the mere look of his mother that something serious was going on, and it was not worth interfering with the conversation. He diverted the attention of the younger children to some attraction, and then carefully led them away. They used to come here a lot, you see. The Petrov family, the park worker, finally began, but I learnt later that they were called that: a father, a mother, and a little girl. They came here almost every week, and then they disappeared. But I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe they found another park they liked better, or something. That's when the entertainment stuff started sprouting up all over the city like mushrooms after a rainstorm. And then what happened? Mia asked, listening to him as if mesmerized. And then I saw an advert in the paper that this girl was missing. The parents were offering a lot of money for any information about her whereabouts, but as I understand it, they never found her. Do you have, a copy of the paper? Kate asked with a mixture of fear and hope. There's no copy of the newspaper, the park employee replied. But if you're interested in the contacts of these people, I've kept them just in case I see or hear something. Digging a little in his pocket, he pulled out an old mobile phone, found the number and dictated it to Kate. It would be nice if you turned out to be Emily, he said to Mia one last time. Her parents, as far as I could see, adored her. Mia and Kate returned home in a strange, agitated state. Perhaps the solution to the mystery that had plagued both of them for 3 years was right in their hands. But neither of them knew where its unraveling would lead. Shrewd Sam, of course, noticed that something was wrong. But he didn't ask any questions. Instead, he diverted his attention away from the younger Jake and Kyle, so they wouldn't pester him. Kate spent several days in a row with the phone in her hands, dialing the number she wanted, then quickly dropping it before the call could go through. It wasn't even that she was afraid of what she might find out. It was just that she had no idea how to start this difficult conversation. But at some point, gathering her strength, she did take that decisive step into the unknown. Hello, what can I do for you? After a few beeps, a pleasant male voice answered her. Hello, Kate said. Then she exhaled sharply and continued, my name is Kate, and I'm calling about your daughter, who disappeared about 3 years ago. What? The polite, neutral, friendly tone of the interlocutor immediately changed. The man was obviously stunned by what he heard and had no idea how to react, whether to be happy or indignant or frightened. You see, the thing is, there is some possibility that she has been in my care all this time. And just recently she was adopted by me, Kate continued. I can't say for sure, Kate continued, because for some reason she had lost her memory and had no idea of her relatives. I don't want to get your hopes up, but a few days ago she seemed to be recognized by an amusement park worker. I think you and I should meet and talk it over. The man replied gruffly, you're right. But I'd prefer the first meeting to take place without the girl's participation. Why disturb her and you unnecessarily? I agree, Kate replied. Only a few hours had passed when Kate, terribly worried, entered one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A man was already waiting for her at the indicated table. He was perhaps 10 years older than she was, which did not affect his attractiveness. Even in such an environment, Kate couldn't help noticing that he looked absolutely gorgeous. Hello again, she said, taking a seat across from him. He nodded silently, either not wanting to say anything or unable to. Without saying a word, he took out a folder from his business briefcase and, placing it on the table, carefully moved it towards her. Kate, in turn, handed him some simple film photographs of Mia. Opening the folder, Kate found that the stranger had the same idea in his mind as she had. He had brought several pictures of his daughter, apparently taken shortly before her disappearance at the very same amusement park. In one of the pictures, she posed in the pink dress she had been wearing the night Kate had found her on the street. There was no doubt about it, it was Mia in the images. Kate had no pictures of the girl from the same period, only the most recent pictures, taken with a recently acquired cheap camera bought offhand from one of the classified sites. Despite this, the man obviously recognized his daughter unmistakably. It's Emily, he whispered. My God, she's alive. And as far as I know, perfectly healthy. Except for the memory loss. I'm afraid it's true that I had no way of providing the standard of living to which she was accustomed. But the alternative was an orphanage, and I felt that even my modest 2-room flat on the outskirts was better than that. The man fell into silence again. Kate did not hurry him. She roughly understood the storm going on in the man's soul. At last, Kate calmed down a little, and the man was able to state his thoughts more or less coherently. The first thing he said was quite unexpected. I never introduced myself, did I? My name is Jack. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Kate replied in a casual tone. I'm sorry, I'm in a bit of a state of shock right now. But anyway, I must thank you for taking my little girl in. I've been trying to find her parents for quite a while, but I guess I missed you somehow, she began cautiously. You, I understand, mostly placed adverts in newspapers, and I put them on the internet. I didn't even think about the internet, and no one told me. Although I was always told I was too modern, especially for my age. Did you report it to the police? I did, of course, he sighed, but they couldn't find anything. That's strange, because I went to the police first. But the officer told me at the time that it was unlikely they would be able to do anything. I didn't know her name, and it must be necessary for them to check through their channels. Kate darkened visibly. Speaking of which, you said she's lost her memory? Unfortunately, yes, Jack replied. I took her to the doctors, but there was nothing they could do. It's true that when we were in that very park, it was as if she began to vaguely recognize the place. Maybe if she sees me, it'll trigger the rest of her memories. I'd like to believe that, Jack said with another heavy sigh. But there's another problem, you see. What do you mean? You see, the girl has lived in our family like a family member. She became very attached to me, and perhaps more importantly, to my children. And I'm going to insist that they keep in touch. Unless, of course, you intend to take her in. Suddenly, Jack was very specific. You're not very well off, are you? I'm not ashamed of it, Kate said. And I can assure you that Emily, gets everything she needs to live. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, Jack said. I just think I have an offer for you that will suit all parties. Unless, of course, you're too attached to your job. What exactly are you proposing? Well, you see, I'm a lonely, busy man, and I'm not sure I can devote the time I need to my child. You see, after everything that's happened, I've been so busy. I have a big mansion in the suburbs, Jack said. You can move in with the kids and be my live-in nanny. Don't worry about school. You can send your kids there with your own driver. By the way, there's an upscale institution just down the road. I think we can get not only Emily there, but her new siblings as well. You said you have several siblings, right? 3, Kate confirmed. And 2 of them are due to start school this year. So you're in? It's a very tempting offer, Kate said thoughtfully. There's just one thing I don't understand. That park worker said that you always came there in 3s. Where's your wife? Jack lowered his eyes to the table, but Kate could see tears glistening in his eyes. Only now did she realize how tactless her question had been. They'd lost the baby. Perhaps they thought the girl was dead. There was no telling what could happen to a mother under such circumstances. You see, Jack said, getting over his emotions rather quickly, Emily was a late child, very much wanted and loved. My wife and I wanted a big family, but it didn't work out for a long time. And then, finally, our daughter came along. The doctors said that the second birth Jessica's body simply could not withstand. And then our only daughter went missing. And now she's found. My poor wife was only a few months away from that moment. She got sick right after Emily went missing. And now she's gone. I'm sorry, Kate said quietly. I'm sorry for your loss. He nodded and took a sip of water from the glass. They sat in awkward silence for a few painful minutes, and then, wanting to change the subject to something less painful, they began discussing the details of the move and Mia's meeting with her birth father. As a result, Kate returned home with a clear plan of action. Her own children took the move to the huge Smith mansion as a magical adventure. Even Sam, always reserved and serious beyond his years, almost jumped for joy. Mia alone showed no signs of happiness. She still didn't remember her father and was afraid to meet him. She was also visibly upset by the news of her mother's death. "I don't remember her now," she said to Kate. "And I'm not even sad." "But if I did, I'd probably be very sad," Mia said. "That's why I chose to tell you now, so you'd be ready when you remember," Kate answered her. It took another 2 weeks before the family was completely ready to move. And now, finally, the day had come when Mia was to meet her birth daddy. Everyone involved in witnessing the event, except for the little twins Taylor and Ryan, were terribly excited. Even Sam was visibly worried about his sister. Jack had organized the transport of their belongings. He sent his personal driver to pick up the family. All the way the girl sat on pins and needles, twirling, bouncing, and unable to concentrate on anything. However, when they drove out of town, she suddenly froze, looking out the window as if she recognized the scenery outside. As soon as the car pulled up to the mansion, she shrieked loudly. Jack was just as worried as his daughter, waiting for them right on the doorstep. The girl got out of the car and froze, looking either at him or at the house. Her father stepped forward, but hesitated, and in the end he stayed where he was, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. She walked over to him and said in a questioning tone, "Daddy?" "Emily, my daughter, do you remember me?" He could see that he was restraining the urge to hug the child so as not to frighten her. After all, he was well aware that he was probably nothing more than a strange uncle to her now. Even though she had been informed that he was her father, she probably didn't remember or feel it. Vaguely, said the girl. "It's like I'm remembering something, but no. Maybe I just made it up in the first place." And unable to withstand the heat of emotion, she cried. Kate and Sam came running over to her and wrapped her in a tight hug. "It's okay," her foster mother said. "It's all right, my daughter. Give yourself time. You'll remember everything. Let's not rush things." The last phrase was addressed to Jack. He, however, did not think to take action, realizing the complexity of the situation. Abruptly turning round, he went into the house, gesturing for the new residents to follow him. The family had already been living in the mansion for a month, and the girl's memory had not even begun to recover. From time to time, she remembered fragments of the story, but she couldn't tell if they were true or figments of her imagination. Finally, Jack and Kate decided that it was time to seek professional help. By some miracle, the woman found a business card of a private clinic, which had once been left to her by one of the doctors of the city hospital. Jack could afford to pay for the services of its specialists, and Mia began to visit the facility on a regular basis. "Don't expect immediate results," one of the doctors warned them. "It can take many months or even years to regain memory, especially if it was lost as a result of a dramatic incident." "Do you think she suffered some kind of trauma?" Jack asked worriedly. "I mean psychological trauma," the doctor explained. "Our examination showed no physical injuries, but the very fact that she was lost could be what blocked her memory, especially if she had time to decide that she was never coming home again. A defense mechanism of sorts, if you like. And now we have to convince her brain that it doesn't need it anymore." That night, after putting the kids to bed, Kate knocked on Jack's room. He was sitting at his desk writing something in a thick notebook. "Do you need something?" he asked politely. "Jack, I've been meaning to ask you something, but I've been hesitating. Tell me how Emily disappeared." "Call her by her usual name if you like. She doesn't respond to Emily anyway. It's not certain she ever will. As for the circumstances of her disappearance, I don't really know much about it. My wife and I put her to bed that evening. In the morning, she was gone. We searched the house and the neighborhood, but we found nothing. There were no security cameras either at our place or on the road at that time. But we found no trace of strangers in the house. It's as if she left on her own of her own accord. But she had no reason, as far as I can see, to do so." "Not as far as I know," Jack replied. "It's been 6 months of treatment at the clinic, and it's finally yielded its first results, and most happily for the girl's father. She finally remembered him. It was early in the morning when a pleased Mia ran down the stairs to the living room where Jack was having breakfast and embraced him in her arms. This, of course, in no way canceled her love and affection for her new family. It was only now that she was really glad that they all lived in one spacious house. From then on, she began to answer to both her names. And when it was time for her to get a passport, she insisted that they both be registered there. From that day on, her memory gradually returned to her. The girl recalled some episodes from her childhood, her mother, neighborhood children with whom she liked to play. By the time she was 14, she remembered everything but one thing. What exactly happened the day she went missing, and how she managed to end up on the other side of town. It wasn't until another 2 years later that those memories began to come back to her as well. Not all at once, very gradually. At first in the form of some vague images that came mostly in dreams, but gradually they became clearer and clearer until they finally formed into one coherent picture. And it was then that Mia Emily finally managed to tell her parents everything. The solution was ridiculously simple and trivial. "I went to get the kitten," she said. "What kitten?" Kate wondered. "A white one, so beautiful. It was in our yard and I couldn't sleep, so I watched it from the window. And then he left the yard and I wondered where he was going, so I climbed out of the window. My room was on the ground floor, so I followed him. I thought it wouldn't be far, I'd just take one look. I came out of the courtyard and he was gone. I went one way, I went the other. I tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. He must have run off somewhere to do his cat thing. Or maybe he was just out for a walk and went home. I was about to too, when I realized I wasn't going to find the cat anyway." "So you just got lost?" John wondered. "Yeah, that's how it works. And apparently trying to get back, I started walking further and further away from home. By morning I reached the town. I was cold, of course, tired and hungry. I decided I could take a bus. I've seen them here, they run here. And I went the wrong way, of course. And to tell you the truth, it was probably the wrong bus. So I wandered around the city for days and got to the other end of it. That's where, as I understand it, nobody thought to look for me. I didn't sleep the whole time, I was afraid. But at some point my body couldn't take it, and I fell asleep right on a bench in the park. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. I went wherever I was going. And then my mom met me. That's the whole story." Around the same time that Mia Emily's memories came back, John and Kate decided to get married. Living in the same house, they became very close and found quite a few common interests. And Kate's own children have long perceived her new husband as their father. He answered them in the same way. Kate fulfilled her childhood dream again, entered the Institute at the Faculty of Economics, and graduated with honors. After that, her husband gladly took her to work in his company. The woman sold her second flat, having fully paid off Alex for his share in this living space. So they lived as a big, friendly family in the huge mansion, which was now theirs. As a memento of their adventures, Mia Emily brought a huge white cat from somewhere. The street animal required a long course of treatment. Her parents grumbled about her daughter's reckless act, but they kept the cat. Very soon he became a favorite in the house. The waitress froze upon finding the little girl's note. There wasn't a second to wait. It all started with the note. Linda sat in the staff room on a plastic stool with her back against the cold wall. In her hand, she held a scrap of white tissue. She didn't need to read the lines again, hastily scrawled in childish handwriting. Linda had memorized the short, poignant text by heart. "My name is Cassandra. Please help me. I'm in danger." The many exclamation points made the message literally scream. It was a scream, a cry for help. Linda, of course, immediately realized who had left the note. The same girl. It was impossible not to notice her. Slim, pale, very pretty. Long hair the color of melted chocolate, gathered in a low ponytail. Big brown eyes. A sweet girl of 12, but not quite ordinary, of course. It was not without reason that Linda had noticed her as soon as she entered the cafe, accompanied by her parents. The girl, now Linda knew that her name was Cassandra, was brought to the cafe late enough, almost at closing time. There were few customers. Cassandra was accompanied by two adults, her mother and father, who were obviously very wealthy people. Linda realized that at once. And it wasn't even about their appearance. Today everyone dressed stylishly and beautifully. You can't tell much from their clothes. The man's gaze was imperious and a little arrogant. He obviously felt himself the master of life, and his wife's gaze showed contempt for others. An unpleasant couple. No, not all wealthy people, of course, seemed so disgusting to Linda. But these. They belonged to a special class of customers, rich, cold, and always dissatisfied with the service or the quality of food. Linda had been working in this cafe as a waitress for almost 7 years. During this time, she had learned to be a very good judge of people. You learn it here, when your salary depends on it. Any mistake, a cranky customer will file a complaint against the waitress, and then this month's bonus will not be seen. And Linda didn't live large anyway. Every penny counted. Behind the important couple walked a quiet girl, Cassandra. It seemed strange at once. Usually children and parents walked together. Or they let the children go first, because this was a family cafe. Linda had seen many families, but here her daughter stepped behind her parents silently, indifferently, like a shadow. The family was seated at a table in the center of the room. Linda walked over to offer the menu to the guests. The father nodded without giving the waitress a glance. Linda stepped back. No need to stand over people's heads. When they were ready to order, they'd call for it. The waitress had a lot to do. Closing soon, she needed to wipe down the bar and arrange the dishes neatly on the shelves. And from a distance, she watched the customers. Linda noticed at once that the girl was dressed a little too strangely. It's July, and the heat is so hot that the air conditioners can't cope with the load. It gets a little fresher in the evening, but it's still stuffy outside. And the girl is dressed like autumn, long dark trousers, trainers, long-sleeved t-shirt. Maybe that's the fashion of teenagers nowadays. No, it didn't look like that. Linda had seen a lot of kids. On the contrary, in summer, girls of that age tend to emphasize their youth and beauty with more open and tight-fitting outfits. There are, of course, representatives of different subcultures. Linda didn't know much about it, who were the goths and who else. But this girl didn't look like them either. Non-formals usually decorated themselves with bracelets and other accessories with symbols, dyed their hair in bright colors, applied eye-catching makeup. Linda was fine with it. Youth went else to experiment with appearance. This girl, Cassandra, looked more like a recluse. Closed black clothes, no makeup, her eyes mostly downcast. A disturbing sight, unfamiliar. There was no energy in this child, no cheerfulness, no curiosity. Linda thought at the time maybe the girl was sick. She had seen such children with special developmental needs. The man ordered coffee for himself and his wife, a milkshake for his daughter, and pancakes with fruit fillings. The family hurriedly ate dinner. Linda was minding her own business, but she kept glancing at the visitors, especially the girl. Cassandra ate the delicious pancakes without enthusiasm. It seemed that she did not do it for pleasure, but simply because it was necessary. Not a single emotion on her pale, pretty face. The parents talked to each other, even smiled, but neither of them ever addressed their daughter, as if she didn't exist. Linda mentally sympathized with the child. She herself had the same indifferent and cold father, who did not notice his only daughter and was not interested in her affairs. But her mother successfully replaced both parents. She would listen to her, take pity, and support her when necessary. Mom worked hard, but always felt when her daughter needed help. Linda, in her 40s, still could not fully come to terms with the fact that Mom is no longer there. Her father is alive, but he lives in another city and has a new family. He had never paid attention to his daughter before, and now it was as if they were neither relatives. Linda did not regret it, probably because from the very beginning she and her father had not developed a warm and close relationship. She was used to it. In this family that visited the cafe before closing time, both parents behaved coldly and aloofly with their daughter. It was as if the child didn't exist. During the entire dinner, the father had only paid attention to Cassandra once, when she had accidentally elbowed his coffee cup. A few drops of the drink spilled out onto the table. The girl immediately shrank back, clearly expecting punishment. Linda could clearly see it in the movement of her thin, sharp shoulders. The father said something sharply and offensively to his daughter, and gave her a look as if she were not a child but a disgusting but not dangerous insect. The mother shook her head contritely, saying, "There you go, you've ruined everything again, you clumsy girl." Unpleasant parents. What else can I say? But mothers and fathers do not choose what they got. They can be worse to live with. Orphanages are full of kids, and there's a lot of street kids on the streets. And there are also dysfunctional families, in which the little ones also have a hard life. But it's a girl. At least she does not starve, and does not walk in worn-out clothes. The family slowly left the cafe in the same order they had entered, Nicholas and Jen in front, Cassandra behind them like a pale shadow. Linda closed the door behind them. The establishment's working day had come to an end. This is a family cafe, not a late-night bar. Linda stretched and exhaled in relief. Finally, this long, hard day was over. There had been a lot of visitors today. The woman was tired. All that was left was to tidy up, sweep up, pick up the rubbish from the floor, and she could go home. And there is a cozy sofa in front of the TV, a fluffy plaid, and her favorite cats, Red Punky and White Zephyr. By the age of 40, Linda had not found her family and was not worried about it at all. Now she wasn't, but now she was humbled by the pain. But once the news that she would never become a mother turned her whole world upside down. She loved children, adored babies since childhood, often saw herself in her dreams as a mother of many children. Even the names of future sons and daughters long ago chose. But the woman managed to pull herself together and find other joys in life. Only here she still loved children very much. That's why she got a job in a family cafe. Small visitors, it seems, felt the favor of the smiling waitress and frankly reached out to her. She was the favorite employee of the cafe with the young guests of the institution. She would joke, she would calm them down. And like Cassandra, she would motivate them to eat a dish that was not too tasty but healthy. The happy parents often wrote compliments to Linda in the book, and she was pleased. Linda had already wiped down all the tables except the one where the last customers were sitting. It was his turn. That's when the woman noticed the note. It was scribbled in red pencil on a scrap of napkin. In the children's cafe, each table had a cup of colored pencils for boys and girls who liked to draw. There was also paper lying here, but they were large sheets, so the girl chose a napkin. The napkin was small, inconspicuous, and fit easily under the spice rack. Linda read Cassandra's poignant text. The girl wasn't sick at all. She was in danger. She needed help. It was not for nothing that the little girl immediately struck the woman as unusual. And now Linda was sitting in the small house, holding a piece of napkin in her hands, and desperately thinking about what to do next. The only solution that came to mind was to go to the police. But it was a little scary. Something told her that it was unlikely that her application would be taken seriously. And the woman had not learned to shout and scandalize, getting her own way, although she should have learned to do so by the time she was 40 years old. Linda was worried about something else if the police did not believe her. What to do next? She couldn't leave her child in danger. Linda realized that she couldn't just move on with her life if she didn't help Cassandra. She would constantly think about the girl's faded gaze, her panic and skinny figure. How do you live knowing that somewhere a child is suffering who has come to you for help? Linda quickly finished her business at the cafe and hailed a taxi. In her handbag was that very note. She would show it to the police right away. They have to look into it. They just have to. But as Linda had hoped, the station didn't take her words seriously. "She's just attracting attention," grinned the investigator with tired eyes. "I have a daughter the same age, and she's always making up things to get attention. Books, soap operas all mess with her head." "You don't understand," Linda objected. That girl didn't look like she was joking. She had those scared eyes. "Well, she's a good actress." The uniformed man was clearly anxious to get rid of the annoying visitor. He probably had enough work to do without her. "Still, take a statement. Check the family." "On what grounds?" asked the investigator. "Did you personally see any of the parents hitting the child or insulting him at least?" Linda shook her head negatively. She already realized that she was unlikely to get anything out of this policeman. He was unwilling to take her seriously. "Look at that note again," Linda insisted. "It's a cry for help." "It's a stupid joke." Believe me, the man shook his head. "I've got a lot more serious things to do here. And you and your note." "What am I to do?" Linda mumbled confusedly. "Go home," replied the investigator, "and throw that note in the bin on your way home and forget about this case. Teenagers do things like that at their age. I'd tell you lots of stories about their weirdness, but I don't have time." Linda walked slowly through the city at night. It was very late, soon to be midnight. Her legs were buzzing with fatigue, but the woman thought of only one thing: how to save the girl. Could this note on the napkin be Cassandra's last chance for salvation? The girl is being bullied by her parents, that much is clear. For Cassandra hid the note from them. What's going on behind the door of their house or flat? What kind of torment is this child enduring? What if the policeman is right, and this is all just a stupid prank? Maybe the parents were only being cold to Cassandra because she's being punished for some similar act. She wanted so badly to believe it and calm down, but Linda saw the look in the girl's eyes. That's hard to play. That child is unhappy, truly unhappy. Linda had a sixth sense of it even before she found the note. "I guess I'll have to call," Linda said aloud. Yes, it wasn't an easy decision, but what to do? We had to save the baby, and all means were good for that. Will would definitely help. At least that's the only one of Linda's acquaintances who had such an opportunity, Will. He used to be the closest thing she had to a man. It's funny to think of it now, but years ago she thought he was perfect. Well, the guy seemed so perfect to her, tall, athletic, driven. They met at the grocery shop where Linda worked as a clerk. It was just a small shop selling all sorts of things: groceries, household chemicals, stationery, small things that people in the neighborhood might need at any moment. Will was one of those residents. He often came into the shop for cigarettes, beer, or dumplings. Linda liked this cheerful boy, always cheerful, polite, neatly and stylishly dressed. Sometimes Will appeared alone, sometimes with his mates. Linda realized he didn't have a girlfriend. Not yet. And that made her happy, although she didn't understand why at the time. One day Will came into the shop a little tipsy, a slightly tortured look, a happy smile. Linda didn't find it unpleasant, on the contrary, even a little amusing. "Girl, don't look that I'm a little drunk," Will said. "I'm not a drunkard. I just found out today that I'm being promoted to lieutenant. So I'm excited. I've waited so long for this." "I didn't think anything bad of you," Linda smiled at the handsome visitor. And it was the truth. "I'm happy for you. Congratulations. I've dreamed of working for the police since I was a kid, catching criminals and all that. I must have seen a lot of films. But they told me I couldn't do it because of my health. And because my father was in prison. I didn't really know him. He's been traveling around the colonies all his life. And yet, just like that. But I still dreamed. So I went to law school," Will continued. "I got in, by the way. and worked at the station as a counselor for a couple of years in a non-certified position for pennies. And finally, today I was shown the order, and I was promoted. There were no other visitors in the shop, so Linda listened to Will quietly, in no hurry. It was very pleasant to talk to a handsome guy like that. It was interesting to learn something personal about him. Turns out Will had a dream. And now it's finally come true. It's so nice when dreams come true, Linda smiled. But if you want something badly enough, it always happens. Do you? Will looked intently into the eyes of the young saleswoman. That look made Linda's heart flutter, and goosebumps ran down her spine. Are you dreaming about something too? Linda was confused. Yes, she had a dream. But to tell Will's innermost thoughts to a drunken Will now, how could I do that? It's too personal. Linda was living alone by then. Her father had moved to another city and had a new family. Linda wondered whether her parents were just as indifferent and cold with the children of their passions, or whether they were trying to pretend friendliness in order to appear better than they really were. Mum was gone. The still young woman left suddenly, right at work. She had a heart attack. At the time of the tragedy, Linda was already an adult. She was studying at a pedagogical university and was going to become a history teacher. Linda adored children and was able to find a common language with them. It was her mother who advised her daughter to study to become a teacher. "You go straight to the teacher," repeatedly said her mother. "People like you should definitely go to school." Linda nodded her head in agreement. Yes, her mother was right. Linda's place was with the children. After her father left, Linda's mother had a hard time. There was a catastrophic lack of money. That's when she started working double shifts. It was necessary to put her daughter on her feet. There was no hope for her ex-husband in this respect. No, until Linda's 18th birthday, he paid child support. But as soon as the girl came of age, all help stopped. Heron pulled the mother from the last strength to feed herself and her daughter. The work was hard, physically exhausting. Linda felt sorry for her parents, tried to help her in everything. She even wanted to drop out of university to get a job. But her mother was categorical in this matter. "And do not think we'll live somehow. It's nothing. How long do you have left to study? You'll get a higher education, you'll become a teacher, a respected man. You won't have to work with your hands like me, ruining your health." Linda decided that she would definitely become a teacher. And not just any teacher, but the best. She would go to work in a gymnasium where they paid more, and her mother would no longer have to work so hard. But Mum didn't live to see it. When Linda was a student, she was left all alone in the world, and she had to leave the university. Linda had to provide for herself. So she got a job as a clerk in a shop in the courtyard. There was no thought of lost opportunities. Diploma, education, career as a teacher, all this became somehow unimportant against the background of the grief that fell on Linda. Mum was her nearest and dearest person. She loved her daughter so much, understood her so well, cared for her, supported her. And now Linda felt lost, as if she had lost her footing. To herself, she seemed thin, fragile, freezing, lonely and sad. No one loved her anymore. No one cared how she felt. And ever since then, Linda only dreamed of having someone close to her, someone who understood and accepted her, someone with whom she could share her joys and sorrows. The girl dreamed of a family, of a kind and handsome husband, at least 3 children, that the flat was warm, noisy, and cheerful. It is unbearable to live alone, not even a word with whom to exchange. I can't tell Will about this secret dream, though I want to reveal my soul to someone. And here the guy himself is interested. He is looking at her attentively and obviously waiting for an answer. "Well, I was not. I dream of a family," said the girl, and immediately lowered her eyes. A family? Will sounded surprised. He suddenly looked at Linda with warmth and sympathy. The girl even felt a little lighter in her heart. "Will, It was as if he understood at once. Is it hard? Linda nodded. Yes, it was hard. It was hard to live without her mother, to cope with everything alone, and to realize that no one cared about you. No one at all. Orphans are at least placed in foster care. They're looking for adults to look after them. And Linda's kind of an adult herself, so she should be able to handle things on her own. And it doesn't matter that she's just over 20, and she has no life experience at all. Somewhat unnoticed by herself, Linda told Will her story. He listened attentively, didn't interrupt. He nodded somewhere, or put a phrase in the right place. Linda could see that he was really interested in all this. He wasn't wasting his time on her out of politeness. You know, why don't we go for a walk sometime? Will suddenly suggested it. Not sometime, but tomorrow. I'm not really in shape today. What time do you get off work? Night shift, 8. I'll be there at 8 tomorrow, Will smiled. You know, I've liked you for a long time. Pretty, very modest, quiet. Not like the other girls. But I've been hesitant to talk to you. I thought you'd send me away. But now, after everything you've told me, I realize what you're like. Well, can I pick you up tomorrow? Come in, Linda nodded, amazed. Will called her beautiful and even asked her out on a date. Is that what's really going on? The girl spent the next 24 hours in joyful anticipation of the evening, but she was also anxious. Well, sure. What if Will just called her out of pity? Or because he'd been drinking, and now he regrets what he did? Or maybe he's forgotten all about that conversation. What if Will doesn't show up? But he arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. The young man was waiting for Linda on the porch of the shop with 3 roses in his hand. Linda's heart beat with joy. She had never been given flowers before in her life. It was so nice, it turned out. Will took her to a cafe, and then they walked around the city and talked for a long time. The guy told his companion about himself. I grew up in a large family. What kind of family? A mother of 3 sons. One pulled because her husband was touring prisons. It wasn't a good fit. Stealing, fighting, robbery. The parent loved adventure, and a life of routine depressed him. The mother feared more than anything that one of her children would follow in their father's footsteps. That's why she kept a strict watch over the boys, did not let her sons down. She had plenty of energy and strength, enough for all 3 of them, whether it was their mother's unrelenting supervision or just their genes. But Will and his brothers had all made it in the world. The eldest, Terrence, worked in a car service. The middle one, Jasper, trained as a machinist. I'd always wanted to be a police officer, Will continued, which wasn't a very typical wish for the son of a recidivist. That's why I went to law school after 9th grade, and then even went to university after the army. Everyone said it wouldn't work out, but it did. I'm a lieutenant now, Will rejoiced. Do you like the job? You're not disappointed? Linda asked. On the contrary, it's becoming clearer every day. I realize that I am where I am, Will answered. Linda was genuinely happy for him. He was moving up the career ladder quite quickly, but he had to work hard. Will was at work 24 hours a day. Sometimes he was called suddenly, and then had to abandon all the planned cases. But Linda treated it all with understanding, didn't beg for attention, and wasn't capricious, as one might expect from a young person. Work is work. Soon they began to live together in the flat that her mother had inherited from her grandmother, though rented a room nearby. The girl herself suggested moving in together. He was very nice. Will could do everything around the house. Linda with him forgot what is falling off wallpaper or a leaky tap. And he was no stranger to cooking. And other women's chores, laundry, ironing, and so on. Most importantly, Linda finally had a close and understanding person who would listen, understand, support. Will himself had not too simple fate. He understood the girl like no one else. With him, Linda felt like behind a stone wall. Will made a good salary. He gave his girlfriend gifts, clothes, jewelry, handbags, shoes, and cute trinkets that warmed her heart the most. Soft toys, sweets, flowers. With Will, Linda first went to the sea, and then he renovated the flat, transformed it beyond recognition. It was a little sad that now the rooms were not the same as they had been when Mum was there. But at the same time, Linda was relieved that after the renovation there was nothing to remind her of the tragedy and loneliness. It was a fresh start. Then there was a wedding, modest, without a feast in a cafe and a crowd of guests at Linda's place. She simply had no one to invite. Will himself did not want a lavish celebration. However, his mother Nicholas arranged a holiday for the newlyweds, invited them to her house, and set the table. Homemade, delicious food, homemade snacks. They sat in a close family circle, the newlyweds, Will's brothers with their other halves and children, and the head of the family, the mother. Everyone wished the newlyweds to have children as soon as possible, and as many as possible. Will and Linda themselves very much wanted to become parents. The lovers had already discussed this issue many times. "We will definitely have a son," Will dreamed. "I will be a real father to him. I will spend all my time with him. We'll be best friends," Linda smiled quietly. She understood why Will wanted a son so much. He wants to give him everything he didn't have. First of all, an attentive and caring father. The girl was pleased with this attitude of her beloved, but she herself dreamed of children. At the thought of what a happy, strong family they would have, breathtaking. Linda had recently prepared names for future sons and daughters, and Will, voicing them, approved. Everything was working out just fine, except that the desired pregnancy did not come. At first, the spouses did not worry about it. A month earlier, a month later, what difference does it make? Both worked, arranged their family nest, traveled. They could not afford foreign resorts, but they regularly flew to their native coast every summer. A year passed, then another. Still no heirs. Linda was already panicking, but she didn't want to go to the doctors. It was as if the young woman felt afraid of hearing a serious diagnosis. Will was more optimistic. "You're always getting yourself worked up," he reassured his wife. "Go, take medication, maybe you have to drink. Everyone heals. I want to hold my son in my arms." Will really dreamed of children. He'd make a great father. And Linda was beginning to feel that her life was too empty and meaningless without babies. But she went to the hospital. At the antenatal clinic, she was given a lot of tests. Linda obediently took everything that was required. The results were almost perfect. Then they sent her for an ultrasound. That's when it all came out. It turned out Linda had a congenital pelvic abnormality. It doesn't interfere with her life, but it does interfere with motherhood. "What am I going to do?" Linda burst into tears at the doctor's office. A middle-aged woman looked at the girl with sympathy. "Honey, do not be upset. Science does not stand still. Maybe someday they'll be able to do an operation that fixes it. But right now, your only option is surrogacy." Linda was relieved when she heard that. Smiling, she thanked the doctor. If she had one chance, she would certainly take it. But at home, Linda carefully studied the information about surrogacy and realized that no, it wasn't for them. The cost is prohibitive and the risks are great. There are so many stories of surrogate mothers not giving their children back to the parents. There's no legal framework, so there's no guarantees. But the main thing is, she and Will just don't have that kind of money, and there's nowhere to get it. That's it. The dream will never come true, Linda told her husband in the evening. For the first time since they had known each other, he looked confused and bewildered. Linda understood what her husband was thinking. She was thinking the same thing herself. How could it be? They were dreaming, planning, hoping. And then all of a sudden this happened. Linda wanted Will, as usual, to put his arm around her, stroke her hair, tell her that everything would be all right. But he said, "I need to be alone," and went into the bedroom. Linda was left alone in the living room with her worries. They then did not talk about it, continued to live, as if by inertia went to work, together at breakfast and dinner, watching TV, lying on the sofa in the evenings. But there was tension between the spouses, which was very hard on both of them. Let's live as we live, Will said one day. You know how much I want to be a father. Do you want kids too? I'm well aware of that. We both need a break. We'll see. Linda nodded. Will's right. What else can they do? Should they live the life they're living? Linda visited several other doctors. The verdict was unequivocal. They all said with one voice that a young woman could not carry a baby on her own, and there was nothing that could be done about it. Somehow Linda gradually came to terms with it, although it wasn't easy. Will looked as if he too had accepted reality. He was joking again, smiling again. But he didn't talk about future plans anymore. He was a little colder too. Linda looked with horror for signs of her indifferent, aloof father in her beloved. And she did. It was very frightening. The woman calmed herself. After all, they had been married for several years. The period of passionate love is long past. The passions have subsided. Will has a lot of work to do. He doesn't have time for tenderness. And yet Linda missed the old Will and their easy, light relationship. It was different now. A lot of things were gone. The trust, the warmth, a bright future filled with children's laughter. One day Linda suggested to her husband that he take a child from the orphanage. What about it? Is that an option? How many orphans are there in orphanages in need of parental support? Why not make an underprivileged child happy? Noel shook his head. I don't think so. I don't want to raise the offspring of an alcoholic or a criminal. Genes, they can show up at any moment. And you won't know what kind of child you are. My mom's been scared of me and my brothers all my life. Lucky we didn't take after our father. What if we weren't? Linda didn't argue. She realized that such a big decision had to be made together. Linda herself would have taken someone else's baby as her own. There was so much unspent warmth in her, she wanted to protect and care for the little man. Will made it clear that he only wanted his own child and nothing else. Well, he had every right to take that view. Perhaps I'll be able to change my husband's mind someday, Linda thought. There's always hope. Maybe Linda would succeed sooner or later. Just in case, she studied databases of orphaned children. They were all so sweet, so defenseless, so unremarkable. She wanted to hug and warm each one, but it was too soon. Will wasn't ready to do that yet. But then something happened that rocked Linda's world. Something she never expected. Will came home late from work, as usual. He had been staying out late a lot lately. Will had talked about a lot of things in the pipeline, so he had to work overtime. He looked a little strange. Linda noticed it right away. His eyes lit up with a joyful fire, a smile on his face, which the man tried in vain to hide. Did something happen? Linda asked. She thought her husband had been promoted again, or that he had solved a long-standing case. But Linda had no idea what she would hear in answer to her question. We need to have a serious talk, Will said. The joyful light in his eyes suddenly faded. His face became serious and impenetrable. It was as if the mere sight of his wife had spoiled his mood. He was clearly uncomfortable being around Linda, and it was frightening. What is it? Linda looked at her husband anxiously. Let's sit down, shall we? And Will, occasionally faltering and looking away, told about everything. And about his worries, unfulfilled dreams of children, about physical and moral fatigue, about the cooling of feelings for the man who once seemed the closest and dearest, and about the mental turmoil about it. It turned out that Will had been hurt and hard lately. Only he tried not to show it. Linda did not notice, because she was absorbed in her own thoughts about unfulfilled plans and dreams. At that very moment, 2 undergraduates were sent to the station where Will worked. The boy was sent to the homicide department, but the girl was attached to Will. He had a lot of routine paperwork to do. So they sent this young lady to be his assistant. The girl was pretty, more than pretty. But Will did not think about anything but work, until one day she confessed her love to him. Jill had looked at Will devotedly during that confession. There were even tears in her eyes. And the man understood that the girl's words were more than sincere. Why would she need him in principle? Not rich, not particularly influential, and he was not handsome. Whatever the case, it turns out that Jill fell in love. That suddenly hurt the man's ego. But such a beautiful girl, and suddenly fell in love with him. A simple investigator. Will, as best he could, explained to the beautiful trainee that they are not a couple, not suitable for each other at all. She needed someone younger, more promising and unmarried at least. But Jill was quite persistent. She was determined to achieve her goal. Of course, one day Will couldn't resist. They became lovers. Linda listened to her husband and slowly died inside. But how could it be? I mean, she believed Will more than she believed herself. She thought they were just going through a rough patch. Anyway, I've been living between 2 fires for months now, Will continued. He looked unhappy, as if he'd been cheated, betrayed, not betrayed. Perhaps it was his conscience that kept him from being overtly happy. Well, thank you for the truth, Linda said with difficulty, trying to keep her voice steady and calm. If you're telling me this, something must have happened. A decision must have been made. Linda hoped that now he would apologize, say that he realized how wrong he had been, that he had made a mistake, that he had lost his temper, that he was sorry, and Linda would forgive him. Of course she would. It'll take time to get back to the way things were, but together they'll get through it. Who doesn't make mistakes? You see, today Jill told me that. Will sighed heavily. Well, she's expecting a baby. Can you believe it? Will couldn't help smiling happily. It lit up his face with a warm glow. The man even squared his shoulders, as if he had shrugged off a load of guilt. Linda, on the other hand, folded herself against the sharp pain in her chest. Her breath even caught at the news. Will leave? Of course, now he's going to leave for that Jill. Will had dreamed so much about having children. And here was a young seductress fulfilling his wish. She, Linda, couldn't and wouldn't. Will have a child in his family, maybe even more than one. And Linda will live alone in her mom's flat, just like before. Alone again, abandoned by everyone, unwanted by anyone. Go away, the woman said quietly. What? Will didn't hear her. Get out of my flat. Will nodded. Then he looked anxiously at his wife. Are you sure you're going to be all right? Do you think I'm going to do anything to myself because of you? Linda grinned. To be honest, those were the thoughts that had flashed through her mind in the first few moments. I'm so sorry, you're good. You don't deserve someone like me, Will said. You're good too, Linda wanted to scream. But instead she turned round and went into the other room. You can pick up your stuff tomorrow when I'm at work. Now get out. Will left. Linda sobbed for a long time afterwards, burying her face in his jumper. It was the jumper she'd taken to work early that morning. Something to remember her spouse by. For some reason, Linda wanted that, to keep at least one of Will's things with her. She probably still loved him, despite the betrayal. They divorced. Linda was alone in her flat again. She had 2 cats to keep her from getting bored. She got one from a shelter and picked up the other one on the street, skinny and hungry. It took a long time to put him back in order, but it was worth it. And Linda quit her job. For some reason, she didn't want to stay in that very shop where she had once met Will. It hurt to be there. Linda found another job. She got a job as a waitress in a family cafe. People with children came here, talking, joking, ordering goodies. Linda, who from an early age loved to take care of children, was able to realize her talents at work. As she looked at all these families, she felt better for some reason. Different faces, different stories, different situations, it somehow distracted her, reminded her that she was not alone in the world. Some little visitors refused to eat. Some were cranky because they had to sit peacefully at the table and wait for the order to arrive, and some were just in a bad mood. Linda had a feel for children. She always knew what to say to a child to cheer them up, to make their little eyes shine with joy. The owner of the cafe appreciated the waitress for the way she knew how to get along with the little ones. Will married Jill and took out a mortgage on a flat for the family, large, spacious, in an upscale neighborhood. His salary allowed him to afford such a payment, as Will was promoted again. Soon he had a son so long awaited, so desirable. And Will kept his promise. He became a wonderful father. Linda met her ex-husband with their young son several times, then at the amusement park, then in the public garden, then in the shopping center. Will gently led the boy, who looked remarkably like him, by the handle and glowed with happiness and pride. It suited him to be a father. Linda was not jealous. She was happy for her ex-husband. Her heart snapped with another longing. It would be great if it was her and Will's son. But Linda wasn't destined to be a mother. Linda didn't want to meet her ex-husband, so when she happened to see him from afar, she turned the other way. Too painful, too awkward. After the divorce, Will had told Linda not to hesitate to contact him if she needed anything. She had nodded in agreement, knowing full well that under no circumstances would she go to Will for help. Not under any circumstances. Not enough for him to do anything for her out of guilt and pity. But it seems like a waste. Will's the only one who can help under the circumstances. He's a police officer, after all, and he's certainly not going to dismiss Linda and her strange story. Linda decided to wait until morning. It was already late at night. She didn't dare to bother Will at such a time. The next day, just before dawn, the woman dialed her ex-husband. "Hello, Will," the woman said when she heard the voice of the man she had once loved. "It seems I finally need your help." "No questions. Come, I'm at work now. I'll tell them to let you in." Will had changed. He'd put on a little weight. His hair had turned gray, and his eyes were peaceful. "Hi," he smiled, rising from his chair for her. A charming, wide smile. It used to send shivers down Linda's spine. And now it was nice to look at Will like that, smiling, friendly. No awkwardness, no tension, anger or resentment. Their meeting had not started the way Linda had imagined. It was as if two friends had accidentally seen each other after a long separation. First, they talked a little about life. It turned out that Will is a father of 2 children. Recently, the family added a daughter. Linda was sincerely happy for her ex-husband, just the kind he'd dreamed of. "So what's going on with you?" Will's eyes suddenly became serious and attentive. "You need my help, don't you?" Linda nodded and told Will everything that had happened to her the day before. She showed him the note the girl had left behind, of course. Now that piece of paper was always in her purse as a reminder that she hadn't imagined what had happened. Wow. Will scrutinized the letters scribbled hastily on the napkin with a pencil. Her parents are probably bullying this kid. If it's her parents at all, and not her kidnappers. I'll get the security tapes now, find out who these people are. We'll get to the bottom of this. Thank you, Linda thanked Will sincerely. It was so nice to feel his support and understanding. She should have been afraid to contact her ex-husband. Will called a day later. Well, we found out who these people are. The man came straight to the point. It's the family of businessman Nicholas Johnson. Nicholas Jones is not the one who owns the dairy? That's the one Will confirmed. Well, not a huge factory. He has a small factory, more like. but their products are sold in many places in the city and are considered to be good. Nicholas Jones is a medium-sized businessman, not an oligarch, but a very wealthy citizen, especially by the standards of their city. A respected man who regularly made charitable donations and participated in campaigns to help the poor. An entrepreneur who led his factory to success with a steady hand. He paid great attention to the quality of dairy products. A frequent character in the local press and an exemplary family man. Nicholas preferred not to talk about his family. He didn't want any of his family to suffer from too much attention. That's how he explained the fact. But Will, of course, found out everything. His wife was a middle-aged lady who had had a bad marriage. Jen came from a poor family. She and Nicholas were once schoolmates. It seems that the future entrepreneur was unrequitedly in love with her. The object of his adoration was the most popular girl in school. So Nicholas, who then became unattractive outwardly, lacked any other merits, had only to dream of a beautiful girl. Time passed. Life has put everything in its place. Nicholas, characterized by diligence in his studies, natural ingenuity and incredible persistence, founded his own dairy mini-empire. He became rich and even famous. The girl, who once occupied all the thoughts of the future businessman, bet on her beauty and lost. Endless dates, outings, a cycle of novels. In the end, Jen was left alone with a newborn daughter in her arms. The father of the baby was not going to recognize the child and somehow participate in his upbringing. He disappeared altogether. Jen raised her daughter alone, and then she had a chance meeting with Nicholas. And whether the businessman's feelings flared up with renewed vigor, or whether they didn't die down at all, perhaps the man simply decided to close his eyes. Anyway, he proposed to a former classmate. She happily grasped him like a drowning man grasping at straws. So they became a family, Nicholas, his high school sweetheart, and her daughter Cassandra. The girl just at that time went to the first grade. At first everything was fine, but later, when Cassandra was going through puberty, she debuted in an illness. It happens sometimes. The girl was given a psychiatric diagnosis. She was pulled out of school, homeschooled. But she didn't seem sick, Linda countered. Weird, yes, but not sick. Smart, conscious Will replied. Well, you're not a psychiatrist. I've seen a lot of things. Sometimes it's completely invisible in people. And then there's a fit of aggression or delirium. It's a scary thing. I don't know. So your note is just a manifestation of illness. Cassandra is sick, and very sick. And her family, she's a model. The girl is clothed. She goes to rehab, camps. Nicholas spares no expense. Often travels with her parents. She's doing well. There's no reason to mess with this family. No legal reason, I mean. So there you go. I did the best I could. Thank you, Linda thanked her ex-husband. Somehow she couldn't believe in the truth of the information he had obtained. It all seemed like some kind of beautiful facade. What was behind it? That was anybody's guess. Cassandra may be sick. But she's unhappy with her family and very afraid of her parents. You can tell. Will, can you give me the Johnsons' home address, please? What's that for? The man was wary. I'm not going to spy on them or anything. No, of course not. I just want to get another look at the girl, just a glimpse of her, to make sure I wasn't imagining it, her battered look, the intimidation in her eyes. It's weird, but okay, write it down. Just be careful. And if you have any problems, call me right away. An hour later, Linda was standing in front of Nicholas' mansion. It was her day off, so the woman decided to take advantage of her free time. The two-story cottage was located in an elite country village. There were a lot of similar houses. There were real palaces with pointed roofs, annexes, and turrets. Nicholas's mansion was modest enough against the background, but it was very beautiful, stylish, and somehow cozy. It looked like the home of a model family. The house was surrounded not by a hedge, but by a metal lattice, through which the garden, the pool, the playground with swings and slides were clearly visible. The gazebo was just a paradise for a child. The guardianship authorities, seeing this splendor, would not think that a girl living in such conditions needs help. But Cassandra was in danger. Linda was convinced of that. Will's story was not credible. Linda didn't know what she should do. She just stood there looking round the house. At least this way she was closer to Cassandra. Suddenly, just as Linda was about to leave, the cottage door swung open. She appeared on the porch. The same girl who had written the note on the napkin in despair. Skinny, touching, defenseless and fragile. Once again, she was wearing a baggy, long-sleeved jumper and jeans. It was a sunny and hot July day. It would have made more sense to see Cassandra in shorts and a tank top, or even a swimming costume. In this heat, you could only splash around in the pool. But no jumper, jeans' strange combination. There were a lot of strange things about this story in general. Linda looked around and called the girl's name. She flinched in surprise, then looked at Linda carefully and seemed to remember her. "Are you the waitress from that cafe? I recognized you. Did you find my note?" Cassandra started the conversation. "Yeah, tell me what's going on with you." "I can't believe one person believed me." The girl clutched at the bars. "You know, wherever I have not left such messages, and on holiday and in local cafes. But no one ever even interested. They probably didn't believe it. You're the first." "Girl, tell me what's going on with you, and how can I help you?" "I'll tell you. But you probably won't believe your stepfather and mother. They always make it sound like it's my fault because I'm supposedly insane. I have an official diagnosis. And you know, no matter what I say, they usually take it as a delusion, as a manifestation of illness." The girl spoke cheerfully and coherently. Linda noted that her speech was well developed, like that of a literate adult. Cassandra looked straight and aware. She did not look like a sick teenager at all. "I believe you, don't worry about it, or I wouldn't be here. It took me some trouble to find your house. You didn't leave an address." "I didn't have time. They're always watching me when we're both in public. It took me a lot of trouble to write that note and leave it. I took a risk. If my stepdad had noticed, he'd have locked me up for months, forbidden me to go out to the garden. It's happened before. And now you will not be noticed, will not be punished for talking to me, a stranger." The girl smiled. "There are only servants in the house, but there is a general cleaning. They do not have time for me. From the windows of the house, this area is not visible. Parents are absent, stepfather at work. Mom's gone to the spa. Won't be back till late tonight. It's a good time to talk." "Tell me about it," Linda asked. "Do you mind if I play the video? It's just that I might need proof. I don't think I can do anything on my own, but I have a friend in the police force. Only he needs hard evidence to make a move." "A friend in the police force is a good thing," the girl said. "It gives me hope. And about the camera? I was going to suggest that myself. If the police don't help, we could put it on the internet or get the press involved. We might need the publicity." Linda was once again struck by the teenage girl's turn of phrase. She switched on the camera on her phone, as long as it had enough charge. This is going to be a long story. "My name is Cassandra," she began, looking into the lens. "I'm being bullied by my parents. I need your help." "I'm going to tell my story from the beginning," Cassandra said. "I lived with my mother, Jen, in a small, cramped studio flat with a 6-foot kitchen. It was an old 5-story building on the outskirts of town. Right behind it was a vacant lot with a motorway behind it. Money was tight. Jen didn't like to work. From time to time, of course. She had to get a job. The single mum's allowance was enough to live on. She worked as a cleaner and a market clerk. But all these jobs depressed the woman who had dreamed of a beautiful life since high school and thought she deserved it. Jen was a real beauty in her youth. She in adulthood was distinguished by a very favorable appearance, tall, slender, big eyes. She had plenty of admirers at school and now, but the quality of her current suitors didn't suit her. They were all tramps as poor as she was. Well, it's the environment's fault, Cassandra continued. As they say, you can't live with the wolves. The places where Jen lived and sometimes worked were not full of princes in white Mercedes. But that's okay, at least the wool from the sheep. The local admirers also got paid sometimes, so I could get something out of them. I felt happy then, even though I lived in terrible conditions, mold on the walls, old cockroaches, secondhand furniture, rusty wiring, meager food. But I had freedom. I ran around the yard all day long with the neighborhood kids like me. We had fun together, we laughed, invented interesting games, climbed trees. I loved my mum very much and thought she was the most beautiful in the world. She, of course, also loved me in her own way and took care of me. But very often Jen would cry after another failure in her personal life. And then she'd start blaming me for things a girl wouldn't understand. If I hadn't given birth to you then, I'd be married to a decent man by now, she said. And with this trailer, who needs me anyway? Jen said. Cassandra shrank back from these words. She felt very guilty. She just didn't know how to help her mother, how to fix the situation. Fortunately, these moments were rare and didn't last long. Jen was quickly becoming herself a cheerful and adventurous woman. Her mother sometimes dressed Cassandra up, gave her makeup, called her a pretty doll. The girl rejoiced. She was happy that she could please her mother in some way. When you grow up, you'll be a beauty. We'll marry you off to a rich man. And you and I won't have to worry, Jen said. Just don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't give up on the little things. Yeah, cause I'll be there for you. I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll guide you. I'm wise now. Cassandra, who was 6 or 7 at the time, could not understand what her mother was saying, but she nodded and smiled, just to please her parent. And then Uncle Nicholas Jones came into her mother's life. Cassandra liked the man at first. He smiled at the girl, often bought her toys and sweets. He treated her mother very well, like a princess. Jen blossomed beside him, became even more beautiful, even more charming. And her eyes shone with a special light. She looked at Uncle Nicholas with such adoration, such hope. And he often hugged her and kissed her. Cassandra would later realize that Uncle Nicholas was just pretending to be kind. Uncle Nicholas and I have decided to get married, a happy Jen told her daughter one day. He proposed to me. Now Uncle Nicholas is going to be your daddy. We're going to live far away from here in a very nice house. You will have your own room, your own bed, a beautiful bed. Just like a princess, and lots of toys. It all sounded like some kind of fairy tale story. Cassandra could not even imagine this house, this garden, though her mother had described to her in color the place where they would soon live. Little Cassandra's life changed dramatically. It took Cassandra a long time to get used to the luxury around her. It was unbelievable. A room of her own with a bed under a pink canopy and shelves full of new toys. A pool in the garden where you could splash around as much as you wanted. Swings, merry-go-rounds and free access, obliging people in uniform, offering for breakfast, lunch and dinner mind-boggling dishes. All this made the girl dizzy with the abundance of impressions during the period of adaptation. Cassandra was so tired that at 8 o'clock in the evening she fell exhausted on her princess bed and fell asleep. However, Cassandra still lacked a few things. Firstly, it was not customary to walk outside the fence here, and she wanted to explore the neighborhood. But you can't, so you can't. Secondly, the girl missed her friends, the boys and girls Cassandra had grown up with. She missed them very much. One day she asked her mother if she could invite them here for a day. "Oh no," Jen said with a shrug. I don't want that gypsy Tabor showing up here. Forget your street kids. Soon you'll have new friends, boys and girls from decent families. Mother had changed a lot. Outwardly, Jen had become so beautiful that she was a sight to behold. Now she spent a lot of time in beauty parlors and even worked out at the gym. Jen made friends with similarly beautiful and well-groomed women. They often met, sat in cafes, went shopping, and just walked around. Her mother looked happy and often said aloud that this was the life she deserved. Jen paid almost no attention to her daughter at that time. The woman tried to get home by the time Nicholas came home from work. And when he appeared, all Jen's attention was directed to her husband, which apparently he liked very much. Cassandra, on the other hand, didn't get much attention. Her mother was focused on Nicholas, on her new friends and hobbies, on anything but her own daughter. Jen literally reveled in her own life, forgetting about Cassandra. Cassandra was looked after by her nanny, a woman with a stern and slightly arrogant face. The girl was afraid of her, but she obeyed her without question. The nanny prepared the girl for school, taught her letters and numbers, made her write curlicues and circles in her copybooks. At first, the nanny was outraged by the child's pedagogical neglect. "Did you grow up with wolves in a pack?" she wondered. "Can't you know such elementary things at the age of 7? But Cassandra was making rapid progress, and the nanny soon changed her mind. "That girl will make a good girl," she said of her pupil. And then school began. Cassandra was sent to a prestigious gymnasium, which was not cheap. The children spent all day in the school, first lessons, then recreation, then extra classes. Cassandra quickly made friends with her classmates. At first they seemed strange to her, too quiet, too boring, not like her backyard friends, whom she still missed very much. Cassandra was surprised that these kids didn't know basic games, catch up, hide and seek with cans. She had taught them, of course. The girls' new acquaintances came to be absolutely delighted. From then on, Cassandra became something of a leader among the new acquaintances. She was the one who came up with fun activities and events that her friends always took up with joy and interest. But teachers and tutors often scolded Cassandra for her excessive initiative. It was much more profitable for them to deal with calm, obedient children. They offered board games and modeling between classes. But they had already got a taste of other entertainment. They were just children. One day during a game of dodgeball, which started in the school corridor, one boy accidentally smashed a glass cabinet with gymnasium awards with a ball. Shards flew everywhere, and one of them injured a girl. Not too serious, fortunately, but the blood in the infirmary stopped for a long time. There was a huge scandal. The parents of the injured pupil were outraged. How could it be that the administration of such an expensive, prestigious gymnasium could not ensure the safety of children? Cassandra was also hurt. The principal shouted at the little girl, whom the teacher almost by the ear brought to his office, accused her of having a bad influence on other children, called her promiscuous. And then, right in front of Cassandra, he called Nicholas and invited him in for a serious talk. Cassandra was sitting outside the office on the couch when Nicholas and Jen walked briskly to the principal's office. At first, the girl felt relieved they were family after all. She was scared and hurt. She didn't understand what she was guilty of and why she was being shouted at now. But her stepfather gave her stepdaughter such an icy stare that she was even more afraid. The mother did not look at her daughter at all. She looked pale, worried, guilty. Cassandra couldn't hear what the adults were saying to the principal. Both parents were silent all the way home. Her mother occasionally turned to her daughter and looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and disappointment. That look made the girl want to fall through the ground. And at home, Nicholas beat the girl. It was the first time, but it would not be the last. He whipped Cassandra, who tried to dodge, fiercely with the belt right on her legs and arms. It left red streaks on her skin, but that didn't stop the man. "You filthy, savage brat," Nicholas said. "I've had to listen to so much reproach because of you." Bad, spoiled genes, you bitch. Well, nothing, I'll teach you. Savages have no place in my house. It was painful, hurtful, scary. Nicholas held his victim tightly, and Cassandra could only twitch, unable to dodge the blows. Her eyes were dark with pain. And her mother? She stood by her side and didn't even try to stand up for her daughter. On the contrary, when it was over, she hugged Nicholas and began to comfort him, not her battered child. Cassandra didn't go to school the next day because she had a fever. Then there was the weekend, during which the girl recovered. No one felt sorry for her, neither her mother nor Nicholas. They had little contact with Cassandra. That, too, was a punishment. On Monday, the girl was sent to grammar school for the first time wearing trousers and a long-sleeved blouse to hide the marks of the beating. It was that very first time Cassandra realized that her stepfather hated her. And her mother? Her mother loves her, of course, it's her mom. But Jen is much more attached to the affluent life her husband provides for her, which means she'll always be on Nicholas's side. Nicholas no longer tried to hide his dislike for his stepdaughter. He had the tacit approval of his wife, for whom he still seemed to have strong feelings. And now Cassandra was often the whipping girl. The occasion could be anything: a bad grade, a teacher's remark, a broken plate, an unkempt appearance. Sometimes Nicholas didn't even need a reason. Sometimes he'd come home upset, and then he'd see the hated Cassandra, and it would start. He must be crazy, the girl said, staring directly into the camera lens. I think so. You see, he enjoys hitting me. His eyes start to shine with joy. It's so scary. I'm afraid that one day he'll cross the line and break me. The mother has seen it all and never, not once, even tried to protect her daughter. Sometimes after another beating, Jen would comfort Cassandra. He means well for you. He's afraid you'll act like a naughty girl. It's just parenting. All loving parents raise their children to be good. You should be glad Nicholas is so caring. But for some reason, Cassandra couldn't be happy. But for a while, she really believed that all this was normal. She'd never had a father before. Maybe that's just how fathers raise their children. Perhaps every one of her classmates was experiencing the same thing. Nicholas tried to hit Cassandra without leaving marks, or leave them in inconspicuous places. When did that fail? Cassandra walked to school in long-sleeved clothes and trousers, hiding the beatings. No one must know what happened yesterday, Jen told her, or they'll know what a naughty girl you are because Daddy punished you. And Cassandra believed her mother. She was ashamed of her scars and bruises and hid them from others. But one day, when the marks of the last punishment had not yet worn off, there was a medical examination in the gymnasium. Cassandra was so embarrassed about her bruises. Now everyone would see how naughty she was. The young doctor was horrified by the marks on the little girl's body. "What's the matter with you?" he asked Cassandra. "Where did it come from?" "I fell down the stairs," she mumbled. It was the first thing that came to her mind. It would be better not to tell these people the truth, so that no one would realize how naughty she was. "She's a hyperactive child," confirmed the teacher in the room. "Something is going on with her all the time." Did the teachers know what was happening to me? Cassandra spoke slowly and clearly so that every word would reach those who would watch the video. I'd like to think they didn't. Because if they knew and kept quiet, because of Nicholas's money and connections, then I'm just horrified at the cruelty of this world. At these words, the girl smiled at the camera. The woman, who was in shock at the story of this child, found the strength to smile back. And Cassandra was growing up. Nicholas was still taking out his anger on his stepdaughter. Jen still acquiesced to it. Up to a certain age, the girl had thought this was the norm. But then, as she grew older, she began to realize what was wrong. Communication with classmates, films, books, Cassandra absorbed information, becoming wiser and more experienced. And one day she realized that everything that was happening to her was a crime and could not be tolerated. I went to the director and wrote a statement right in his office, the girl said. I told them everything, even showed them my bruises and abrasions, Cassandra said. They said they would look into it. I was so hopeful, I thought the nightmare was over, but it got worse. The headmaster turned to Nicholas, and he made it sound like Cassandra wasn't quite normal. Said they'd already made an appointment for her to see a psychiatrist. The headmaster believed it. Cassandra really did start being dragged round to the doctors. What kind of doctors were they? The girl assumed Nicholas had paid them. That's how a perfectly healthy child got a diagnosis on her chart. Now everything I said was just nonsense, Cassandra said. He had total power over me. I became his official whipping girl. Cassandra took a deep breath and continued the story. I was taken out of school and homeschooled for good measure. I was now studying with teachers in an online format. What now? There's no one to complain about the person who raises you, feeds you, clothes you, Nicholas gloatingly questioned, looking at his stepdaughter. This was not at all the effect the girl had expected from her statement. She was now a prisoner, and in this beautiful house, even the minimal freedom she had left was taken away from her. Cassandra was deprived of communication with anyone except her mother, servants, and stepfather. She was labeled abnormal in the eyes of others. And the cherry on the cake, the girl's internet was cut off. Now she couldn't even communicate on social media. Total isolation. It's really crazy, Cassandra said. But Nicholas and Jen made it seem like they were perfect parents. They took Cassandra on trips, sometimes taking her to cafes and restaurants. In general, they appeared with the girl in public to avoid suspicion. The beatings continued. Nicholas took all his anger out on his stepdaughter. Each time he went further and further and further. He never touched her face, because it was almost impossible to hide the beatings on her face. Jen kept silent, not only out of a desire to please her husband, but also out of fear. All the beatings and abuse went to her daughter. Who knows, maybe if it hadn't been for this lightning rod, she would have had to pay for her nice, fat life. I left messages wherever I could, Cassandra said in a shaky voice. I had spoken calmly before, but now my voice trembled. I tried to call for help, but it was no use. They thought I was crazy. One day Nicholas saw me trying to tell a woman on the street. It wasn't here. We were on holiday in Egypt at the time. He came over, showed the lady a diagnosis certificate, and then beat me so badly I passed out. I spent the rest of the holiday in bed in my room. They'd lock me up and go to the beach, and I thought I was going to die. I even wanted to. But no. I survived. I came round. Baby, how much have you been through? Linda couldn't help herself. He's getting angrier and angrier. I think he's losing his mind. Soon Nicholas will kill me and then make it look like an accident. He's got enough money and connections to do that. I'm scared. I'm very scared. I want to live, but there's no escape. And if I do, they'll bring me back. I mean, we have a happy family and everything for the baby. There's no help. This is my last chance to make a name for myself. Help me. Linda stopped the tape. She looked at the girl with pity and tenderness, and wanted so much to hug this poor child, so much to take her out of this terrible place right now. I'll do anything to get you out of here, the woman promised. And then a hunch suddenly struck her. Cassandra, baby, let us take pictures of your bruises and scars. Show them to me. Cassandra nodded briefly. She quickly rolled up the sleeves of her jumper and rolled up her trousers, and to the amazed Linda's eyes, a terrible picture appeared. Bruises, cuts, abrasions. The girl's entire body, hidden beneath her clothes, was covered with wounds and scars of varying age. Cassandra pulled up her jumper. Her stomach was a solid bruise with yellowing edges. The girl pulled back the neck, a red furrow showing on her thin neck. Linda gasped. Her hands were shaking, but she'd filmed the whole thing. It was frightening to imagine the nightmare the girl was living in. "I'm going to the police. I'm going to the station right now," the woman promised the little girl. "Thank you," she smiled. "You're the first person to believe me. I just wish the police hadn't blamed it on my diagnosis. Nicholas once told the maid who happened to see my cuts on my hands that I was self-mutilating because of my illness. This is a man who has children. He'd believe it. He's got kids himself. He'll understand." It was scary leaving Cassandra alone in the mansion, but how else could she help her? Just get that video evidence to the station as soon as possible. Will reviewed the video several times. His face expressed a variety of emotions: bewilderment, surprise, then anger. "What a bastard," the man exclaimed in anger. "Linda, you go now. I need to assemble a group, the guardianship authorities, medics. Don't worry, I'll keep you informed." "You're going down there right now?" "No, it's not that quick. But we're going to get the girl out, and soon. She's in a lot of danger." Linda went home. There, next to her favorite cats, she finally let her feelings out. Linda sobbed. She was shivering violently. She was afraid for Cassandra. She truly didn't understand the girl's mother. How could she bear to see her child treated like that? This Jen had been given such a treasure, a beautiful, intelligent daughter. And she did not appreciate the gift of fate and behaved like that. Cassandra ended up fine. Will told me later how the events unfolded. He stopped by Linda's house himself to bring her up to speed. It was so strange to see him back in that flat. Cassandra had just been taken to hospital at first. Nicholas claimed that his daughter had self-inflicted these injuries because of her diagnosis. He again tried to paint his stepdaughter as incompetent. The child welfare officials and the police did not argue with him. They only said that the girl should be examined but also placed temporarily elsewhere. Since the parents could not cope with a sick child, they promised that as soon as the child's condition stabilized, she would be returned to the family. Nicholas was worried, tried to threaten, offered money. He realized how it would all end. The man knew perfectly well that his stepdaughter is absolutely normal, mentally healthy child. This fact was quickly confirmed at the hospital. Cassandra had no psychiatric diagnosis whatsoever. The medical professionals who made it have yet to be dealt with. Examination of the wounds on the teenager's body showed that the girl could not have physically inflicted such injuries on herself. So someone else did it. Who? Considering Cassandra had been inside the walls of the house the whole time. The answer was self-evident. The victim gave a statement. She detailed how and when she received her bruises, cuts, and abrasions. Nicholas was immediately taken into custody. The police were very keen to prosecute the mother. She was, in fact, an accessory to the crime. But Jen managed to get away with it. The woman assured that she lived in mortal fear of her husband, that she was afraid of making things worse, so she kept quiet. That may have been partly true. Jen was just a witness in the case. But the child welfare authorities did initiate a termination of parental rights. Cassandra was in danger with this woman. The mother never once complained about her spouse's actions, never once stood up for her daughter, for reason enough. Cassandra was placed in an orphanage. Linda visited the girl often. She seemed happy and content with her life. "It's nice here, it's peaceful," she said. "I can study, I can socialize with the boys, I can walk in the yard. They take us on excursions. And the most important thing is that I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be afraid that Nicholas, who came back late at night, angry and upset, will drag me out of bed with something and beat me up. It's such a blessing." Linda could hardly hold back her tears at the time. What kind of life did the girl have if the orphanage was her happiness? They socialized very well and soon became friends. Cassandra was an amazingly bright and cheerful person, despite the fact that she had been through so many trials. Linda sincerely wanted to help her forget all this horror and give her a happy childhood. Cassandra needed warmth and attention. The orphanage is good, but there are so many children here. The carers simply do not have enough time to listen and support each one. Will was the first to know about Linda's decision. The woman called him to find out how to proceed. "You know, I'm not surprised," said the ex-husband. "I knew you'd come to this sooner or later, and I'm very happy for the girl." "So you're going to help me do it?" Linda asked. "Because I don't know where to start." "I'll help you with the adoption we promised. I know some people who get it done quickly, as long as the police agree. But I don't think that will be a problem either." "No problem?" Linda said confidently. The first morning in September was fresh but sunny. For the first time in a long time, this date meant something to Linda. She was seeing her daughter off to 7th grade. Yes, her daughter. Cassandra was now 13 and had grown a lot over the summer. Her old uniform was getting too small. Together they picked out new clothes for the girl to wear to school. They spent a long time shopping, looking for clothes that would fit Cassandra perfectly. It was not an easy task. Linda got a teenager at once, bypassing the stage of cute baby dresses and bonnets. Cassandra was very tall and very thin. Apparently, it's hard to find anything to fit these kids. But that's okay, Linda and Cassandra made it work. "Cassandra, get up. We're late for the line," Linda exclaimed, glancing at her watch. The aroma of fresh toast and coffee wafted from the kitchen. "It's time for breakfast." "Good morning," the girl smiled as she emerged from the bedroom. She was so cute, with disheveled hair. There were no more bruises and abrasions on her arms and legs. Only the scars from particularly deep cuts were reminders of the nightmare of the past. There weren't many of them left all over his body. But nothing. Time would heal everything, smooth everything out. Cassandra walked over to Linda and hugged her. She always did that. The girl missed hugs and warmth. Linda just really wanted someone to care for, someone to look after. The perfect combination for both of them. The younger one got a loving, caring mother. The older one got a grateful, beautiful daughter. Jen had tried to reconnect with Cassandra, calling her, even coming to the school gates. But the girl wasn't ready for that yet. The very sight of Jen was bringing Cassandra back to the hell she had lived in for so many years. Resentment towards her mother, misunderstanding, anger. Cassandra still hadn't forgiven her parent. But psychologists worked with the girl. At first, Linda took her adopted daughter to sessions every day. Now the visits were reduced to once a week. Cassandra's psychological trauma was being worked through. The injury to her soul was even more serious than the injury to her body. The outcome was to be Jen's forgiveness of her daughter. It was necessary for Cassandra herself. It would make it easier for the girl to move on. There was still a lot of work to be done, but together they would get through it. There are two of them, and that's strength.